The woman signing divorce papers in a sterile lawyer's office had no idea she was carrying a secret that would bind her to a dangerous man forever. Evelyn Cross destroyed the pregnancy test before her ex-husband could use it as leverage, walked away from a failed marriage, and accepted an invitation that should have been harmless. One night. One powerful stranger. One decision that would echo through 5 years of hiding, only to surface when her daughter's failing body demanded the one thing Evelyn had sworn never to ask for, the bone marrow of a man who didn't know he was a father. If you're drawn into stories of forbidden love, second chances, and the collision between past mistakes and present desperation, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Evelyn Cross stared at the signature line on the divorce decree, her hand trembling slightly as she pressed the ballpoint against the paper. The lawyer's office smelled of leather and old coffee, the kind of staged professionalism that made life-altering moments feel transactional. Across the polished mahogany table, Richard barely looked at her. His attention was fixed on his phone, his jaw tight with the same impatience that had characterized the last 2 years of their marriage. "Just sign it, Evelyn," he said without looking up. "We both know this is over." She wanted to tell him that she'd known it was over long before today. She'd known it the first time he'd raised his voice in public, the first time he'd controlled her bank account, the first time he'd made her feel small enough to disappear. But Evelyn had learned that words didn't matter to Richard. Only control did. Only winning. So she signed. The lawyer collected the papers with the efficiency of someone who'd witnessed 1,000 endings. Richard stood immediately, smoothing his tie as though shaking off the last remnants of their shared life. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back. He simply walked out, leaving Evelyn sitting in the sudden hollow silence of her new freedom. She should have felt relief. She should have felt something other than the cold numbness that had settled into her bones. But all Evelyn felt was empty and terrified of what came next. The pregnancy test was still in her purse. She'd taken it that morning in the bathroom of her temporary apartment, hands shaking as the second line appeared. Positive. Unmistakably. Impossibly positive. For 10 minutes, she'd stared at it, her mind racing through scenarios that all ended the same way. Richard would use it. He would twist it into leverage, into another chain to keep her bound to him, into proof that she couldn't survive without his money, his name, his control. So Evelyn had wrapped it in tissue, shoved it deep into her purse, and gone to sign the papers anyway. Now sitting alone in the lawyer's office, she pulled it out. The plastic felt fragile between her fingers. She looked at those 2 lines one last time, memorizing them, acknowledging the life she was about to erase from her immediate future. Then she stood, walked to the restroom down the hall, and dropped it into the trash. She couldn't tell Richard. She wouldn't. Whatever happened next, she would handle it alone. But first she needed to remember how to breathe. Evelyn's best friend Maya found her 2 hours later, sitting in a coffee shop with an untouched latte going cold between her hands. "There you are," Maya said, sliding into the seat across from her. Her dark eyes were warm with concern, her presence a lifeline Evelyn hadn't realized she needed. "I've been calling you." "I turned my phone off," Evelyn admitted quietly. "Smart. Richard's been blowing up social media like a scorned teenager." Maya reached across the table and squeezed Evelyn's hand. "But that's done now. You're free. Legally, officially free." Evelyn nodded, though the word free felt foreign. She didn't feel free. She felt adrift. "I have something for you," Maya continued, pulling an elegant envelope from her bag. The cardstock was thick, expensive, embossed with gold lettering. "Before you say no, it's a gallery opening tonight. Art, wine, interesting people. Exactly the kind of distraction you need." Evelyn glanced at the invitation. The venue was in the city's most exclusive district, the kind of place she and Richard used to attend when he wanted to show her off like an accessory. Her stomach turned at the thought. "I can't," she said. "You can," Maya insisted. "You need to do something that isn't sitting alone in that apartment thinking about him. And who knows? Maybe you'll meet someone new. Someone who actually deserves you." Evelyn almost laughed. The idea of meeting someone, of opening herself to another person, felt impossible. She was carrying a secret that weighed more than any relationship could bear. But Maya was looking at her with such hope, such determination to pull her back into the world of the living, that Evelyn found herself nodding. "Okay," she whispered, "just for a little while." Maya's smile was bright enough to momentarily chase away the shadows. "That's my girl. Wear that black dress you never let yourself wear around Richard. The one that makes you look like you could break hearts without even trying." The gallery was a study in controlled elegance. High ceilings stretched overhead, illuminated by soft lighting that made the abstract paintings glow like windows into other worlds. Well-dressed guests moved through the space with practiced ease, their conversations a low hum beneath the classical music drifting from hidden speakers. Evelyn stood near the entrance, her black dress clinging to her frame in ways that felt both empowering and vulnerable. Maya had disappeared into the crowd within minutes, drawn toward a sculptor she'd been following on social media. Evelyn told herself she didn't mind. She needed a moment to adjust, to remember how to exist in spaces like this without Richard's hand at the small of her back, guiding her, controlling her. She moved toward a painting, an explosion of crimson and gold that seemed to pulse with barely contained violence. She was studying it, losing herself in the chaos of color, when a voice spoke beside her. "Interesting choice." Puffs Evelyn turned. The man standing next to her was tall, with dark hair styled with casual precision and eyes the color of smoke. He wore a tailored suit that fit him like it had been designed specifically for his frame, and he held a glass of wine with the ease of someone who belonged anywhere he chose to be. But it was his presence that struck her, calm, controlled, quietly commanding in a way that made the crowded gallery feel smaller. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said. He gestured toward the painting. "Most people are drawn to the blues and greens tonight, the calmer pieces. But you chose the violent one." Evelyn looked back at the canvas, seeing it differently now. "Maybe I'm tired of calm." The corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Marco Valenti," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His grip was firm, warm. "Evelyn Cross." "A pleasure, Evelyn Cross." His gaze held hers, steady and assessing in a way that should have felt invasive but somehow didn't. "Are you an art collector?" "Not exactly," she admitted. "My friend dragged me here, said I needed a distraction." "From?" The question was simple, but it carried weight. Evelyn found herself answering with more honesty than she'd intended. "From my life, I suppose." Marco studied her for a moment, and she had the strange sensation of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. Not as Richard's wife, not as someone's accessory, but as herself. Whoever that was. "Then let me offer you a better distraction," Marco said. "The wine here is terrible, but I know a place nearby with a decent Cabernet. If you're interested." Every rational part of Evelyn's mind screamed that this was a bad idea. She didn't know this man. She was freshly divorced, secretly pregnant, and in no position to make decisions about anything, let alone accepting invitations from strangers who looked at her like they could read her secrets. But she was so tired of being rational, so tired of being careful. "Lead the way," she said. The wine bar was tucked into a quiet corner of the city, all exposed brick and soft jazz. Marco led her to a private booth in the back, away from the handful of other patrons, and ordered 2 glasses of Cabernet without asking what she preferred. Normally, that kind of assumption would have irritated her. Richard had done it constantly. But something about Marco's confidence felt different, less controlling, more assured. "So," Marco said once the wine arrived, "what does Evelyn Cross do when she's not being dragged to art galleries?" "I used to teach," Evelyn said, surprised by the past tense that slipped out. "Literature. High school." "Used to?" She took a sip of wine, buying herself time. The Cabernet was rich, complex, exactly as good as Marco had promised. "My ex-husband didn't think it was appropriate for his wife to work." Marco's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "Your ex-husband sounds like a man who confused possession with partnership." The accuracy of the statement made Evelyn's throat tight. "That's one way to put it." "And now?" Now I'm figuring out who I am without him." The words felt true as she spoke them, even though she had no idea how to actually accomplish that goal. "What about you? What does Marco Valenti do?" "I invest," he said simply. "Real estate mostly. Some other ventures." It was a careful answer, deliberately vague, and Evelyn found herself curious about what he wasn't saying. But she didn't push. She understood the need for privacy, for keeping certain parts of yourself hidden. They talked for hours. The conversation flowed with an ease that surprised her, moving from art to literature to the strange loneliness of city life. Marco was intelligent, well-read, and when he spoke about books, his entire demeanor softened in a way that made him seem almost approachable, almost human beneath that controlled exterior. "You remind me of someone," Marco said eventually, his gaze thoughtful. "Who?" "Someone who's been through a war and came out on the other side." He leaned back, studying her. "But you're still carrying the battlefield with you." Evelyn's breath caught. No one had ever described it so perfectly. "Is that obvious?" "Only to someone who knows what it looks like." Marco's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "I've seen that look before, Evelyn. In mirrors, mostly." She wanted to ask what war he'd fought, what battlefield he carried, but before she could, her phone buzzed on the table. Maya's name flashed across the screen with a message. "Where are you? You disappeared!" Reality crashed back. Evelyn glanced at the time and realized it was past midnight. She'd been here for over 3 hours, lost in conversation with a man she'd just met. "I should go," she said, though part of her wanted to stay. Marco nodded, signaling for the check. "I'll walk you out." Outside, the city was quieter, the streets lit by amber streetlights and the distant glow of late-night restaurants. Marco's car was parked nearby, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than Evelyn had made in 2 years of teaching. He opened the passenger door without asking if she needed a ride, and again she found herself accepting. They drove in comfortable silence. When they reached her apartment building, modest, unremarkable, a far cry from the penthouse she'd shared with Richard, Marco pulled to the curb and turned to face her. "Thank you for tonight," Evelyn said. "I needed it more than I realized." "So did I," Marco said, and there was something in his voice that made her believe him. She should have said goodnight, should have walked away and never looked back. But when Marco's hand brushed against hers, when his fingers curled gently around her wrist, Evelyn didn't pull away. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I don't make a habit of this, but I'd like to see you again." Her heart was racing. Every logical part of her mind was screaming warnings. She was pregnant. She was broken. She had no business starting anything with anyone. But in that moment, looking into Marco's steady gray eyes, Evelyn made a choice that had nothing to do with logic. "I'd like that too," she whispered. Marco's thumb traced a slow circle against her pulse. Then he leaned in, his movements deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away. When his lips met hers, the kiss was soft, controlled, nothing like the demanding, possessive kisses Richard had claimed. This was a question, not a command, an invitation, not a conquest. Evelyn kissed him back. When they finally pulled apart, her breath was unsteady, her mind spinning. Marco's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes held heat that made her skin flush. "Good night, Evelyn Cross," he said. "Good night, Marco Valenti." She stepped out of the car and walked to her building without looking back. But she felt his gaze on her until she disappeared inside. And when she finally reached her apartment and closed the door, Evelyn leaned against it and tried to steady her racing heart. That night was supposed to be a distraction, a brief escape from the wreckage of her marriage and the secret growing inside her. But as Evelyn lay in bed hours later, unable to sleep, she realized something that terrified her more than anything Richard had ever done. She wanted to see Marco Valenti again, and that wanting felt dangerous in ways she couldn't yet name. Over the next 3 weeks, Evelyn fell into something that felt almost like a dream. Marco called the next day, his voice warm over the phone as he asked her to dinner. Then coffee. Then a late-night walk through the city's botanical gardens when she mentioned she couldn't sleep. He was attentive without being overbearing, interested without being invasive. He listened when she spoke about her marriage, her fears, her uncertainty about the future, and he never once tried to fix her. He simply let her be broken, messy, real. Evelyn didn't tell him about the pregnancy. She told herself it was too soon, that she barely knew him, that bringing a child into whatever this was would complicate everything beyond repair. But the truth was simpler and more cowardly. She was afraid. Afraid he would leave. Afraid he would stay for the wrong reasons. Afraid that this fragile, beautiful thing growing between them would shatter under the weight of reality. So she kept her secret, even as her body began to change in subtle ways only she noticed. Their fourth date was different. Marco picked her up in the evening, but instead of heading to a restaurant, he drove them to a penthouse apartment overlooking the city. The space was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture that looked sculpted rather than chosen, art that belonged in museums. "This is where you live?" Evelyn asked, stepping inside. "One of the places," Marco said, closing the door behind them. "I thought you might appreciate a quiet evening. No crowds, no interruptions." He'd prepared dinner himself, pasta with a wine reduction that was so perfectly executed it made Evelyn wonder what else she didn't know about him. They ate at a table by the windows, the city spread out below them like a carpet of stars. "I need to tell you something," Marco said as they finished the meal. Evelyn's heart seized. Here it comes, she thought, the truth, the complication. The reason this was too good to be real. "I'm listening," she said carefully. Marco set down his wine glass, his expression serious. "My life is complicated, Evelyn. The investments I mentioned, they're legitimate, but they're built on a foundation that isn't entirely clean. I've worked hard to separate myself from certain activities, but my past isn't simple." Evelyn studied him, trying to read between the lines. "Are you telling me you're dangerous?" "I'm telling you that people in my world operate by different rules," Marco said. "And if you continue seeing me, you'll be exposed to that world whether I want you to be or not. I need you to understand that before we go any further." She should have been frightened, should have heard the warning for what it was and walked away. But all Evelyn felt was a strange sense of recognition. Marco was offering her honesty, raw, uncomfortable honesty, in a way Richard never had. "I appreciate you telling me," Evelyn said quietly, "but I'm not as fragile as you think." Marco's gaze softened. "I know you're not fragile, Evelyn. That's why I'm telling you the truth. You deserve to make an informed choice." "Then I choose to stay," she said. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Marco stood, crossing to her side of the table. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses she could feel against her skin. "Are you sure?" he asked. Evelyn answered by kissing him. This kiss was different from the first. It was deeper, more urgent, fueled by 3 weeks of careful restraint finally breaking. Marco responded immediately, his hand sliding into her hair as he pulled her closer. Evelyn felt herself melting into him, her body responding in ways that terrified and thrilled her. They moved to the bedroom in a tangle of shared breath and whispered names. Marco undressed her slowly, reverently, as though she were something precious he was afraid of breaking. When he finally laid her on the bed, his body covering hers, Evelyn felt tears slip down her temples. "What's wrong?" Marco asked immediately, pulling back. "Nothing," she whispered. I forgot what it felt like to be wanted like this. Not possessed, just wanted." Marco kissed away her tears, his movements impossibly tender. "You're not something to be possessed, Evelyn. You're someone to be cherished." They made love slowly, carefully, and when Evelyn finally fell asleep in Marco's arms hours later, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. But safety was an illusion. Evelyn woke the next morning to find Marco already dressed, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the steel beneath it. "I don't care what he wants," Marco was saying. "Tell him the answer is no. Permanently." He ended the call and turned to find Evelyn watching him. His expression softened immediately. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to wake you." "It's okay." Evelyn sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. "Is everything all right?" Marco crossed to the bed and sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Just business. Nothing you need to worry about." But Evelyn saw the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he was choosing his words. She was about to press further when a wave of nausea hit her so suddenly she barely had time to register it. She lurched from the bed and ran to the bathroom, making it to the toilet just in time. Marco was there instantly, holding her hair back, his hand steady against her spine. When the sickness finally passed, Evelyn sat back against the cool tile, mortified. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I must have... the wine, maybe, or..." "Evelyn..." Marco's voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made her freeze. "When was your last period?" Her blood ran cold. She looked up at him, seeing the understanding in his eyes, the way he was carefully not pushing but clearly already knowing. And in that moment, Evelyn realized her carefully constructed secret had just shattered. Her voice broke. "Marco, Are you pregnant?" he asked gently. The question hung between them like a guillotine. Evelyn could lie. She could claim food poisoning, stress, anything but the truth. But as she looked into Marco's steady gray eyes, she found she couldn't. "Yes," she whispered. Marco was silent for a long moment. Then, to her shock, he reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest as though she might break. "How far along?" he asked quietly. 6 weeks? Maybe 7? Evelyn's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "It's not... Marco, it's not yours. It's my ex-husband's. I didn't know before the divorce was finalized, and when I found out, I didn't know what to do." She waited for him to pull away, to be angry that she'd kept this from him, to realize that she was too complicated, too broken, too much of a liability for whatever this was between them. Instead, Marco's arms tightened around her. "Does he know?" Marco asked. "No. And I don't want him to. Ever." Marco pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. "Then he won't. I promise you, Evelyn, he won't." The certainty in his voice should have comforted her, but something about it, the absolute conviction, the undertone of threat, sent a chill down her spine. She was suddenly, acutely aware of what Marco had told her the night before about his world, his past, the different rules he operated by. "Marco, I need you to understand," Evelyn said urgently. "This is my situation to handle. I'm not asking you to fix it, or to..." "I know you're not asking," Marco interrupted quietly, "but I'm offering. Whatever you need, Evelyn. Protection, resources, a safe place to figure things out. I'm offering it freely, with no strings attached." "Why?" The question came out broken. "Why would you do that for someone you barely know?" Marco's thumb traced her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "Because in the 3 weeks I've known you, Evelyn Cross, you've reminded me what it feels like to be human, and because no one should have to face something like this alone." Evelyn felt tears spill over, hot against her cold cheeks. She'd spent so long being strong, being independent, refusing to need anyone. But in that moment, held in the arms of a man who was offering her exactly what she needed without demanding anything in return, her walls finally crumbled. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," Marco said, "but you don't have to be scared alone anymore." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other on the bathroom floor, while the morning sun climbed higher outside the windows and the city woke below them. And for the first time since Evelyn had seen those 2 lines on the pregnancy test, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she would be okay. She had no way of knowing that the safety she felt in Marco's arms would become the very thing she'd one day run from, or that the child growing inside her would become the thread that bound them together across 5 years of silence, fear, and carefully constructed distance. But that morning, none of that mattered. That morning, Evelyn simply held on and let herself be held. And somewhere in a distant part of the city, in an office that dealt in power and violence and the kinds of business Marco Valenti had promised to leave behind, a phone call was being made. A name was being whispered, and the wheels were set in motion for a collision that would change everything. But Evelyn knew nothing of that yet. For now, she was safe. For now, she was protected. For now, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of doctor's appointments, morning sickness, and Marco's steadfast presence. True to his word, he asked nothing of her. He simply made space in his life, in his home, for her to exist. He drove her to prenatal checkups and waited in sterile lobbies without complaint. He learned which foods she could stomach and kept them stocked in his kitchen. He held her hair when she was sick and her hand when she was scared, and he never once made her feel like a burden. Evelyn tried to maintain her independence. She kept her own apartment, insisted on paying for her own groceries, refused to let Marco completely take over her life. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, his world became hers. She slept at his penthouse more often than her own place. She learned the names of his security team, the patterns of his business calls, the careful way he compartmentalized his life. She also began to understand what he'd meant about his past not being simple. Men came and went from Marco's office at odd hours. Conversations ended abruptly when she entered rooms. And once, late at night, she'd woken to find Marco standing by the bedroom window, a gun in his hand, his entire body tense as he watched the street below. When she'd asked what was wrong, he'd simply said, "Nothing anymore," and put the gun away. Evelyn knew she should be more frightened, should demand answers, should protect herself and her baby from whatever darkness lingered in Marco's world. But she'd also seen the way he looked at her growing belly with something like reverence, the way he asked permission before touching her, as though she were something sacred, the way he read aloud from the pregnancy books he'd bought, his deep voice stumbling over medical terms, his questions earnest and unguarded. "Does it hurt?" he'd asked one night, his hand hovering over her stomach. "When the baby moves." "No," Evelyn had said softly, guiding his hand to where she could feel the faint flutter. "It feels like hope." Marco's expression had crumbled then, just for a moment, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath his controlled exterior. "I never thought I'd feel hope again," he'd whispered. Those were the moments that kept Evelyn there. Not the money, not the protection, but the glimpses of who Marco Valenti was beneath the armor. A man who'd built walls around himself so thick that even he'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. But walls had cracks. And one night, 3 months into their relationship, Evelyn discovered just how deep those cracks ran. She'd woken around 2 in the morning, thirsty and uncomfortable, her pregnant body making sleep increasingly difficult. The bed beside her was empty. She found Marco in his office, sitting in the dark with a glass of whiskey and a photograph. "Marco?" she said softly. He looked up, and in the dim light, she saw tear tracks on his face. Evelyn crossed to him immediately, kneeling beside his chair. "What is it? What's wrong?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he handed her the photograph. It was a woman, beautiful, dark-haired, laughing. She was holding a little boy, maybe 3 years old, who had Marco's eyes. "Her name was Sofia," Marco said, his voice rough. "My wife. That's our son, Matteo." Evelyn's heart stopped. "Was?" "They died 4 years ago." Marco took the photograph back, his hands trembling slightly. "A car accident. Targeted. Meant for me." "Oh, Marco," Evelyn breathed. "I built an empire to protect them," Marco continued, staring at the photograph. "I made deals with dangerous people, crossed lines I swore I'd never cross, all to keep them safe. And in the end, it was my world that killed them." Evelyn wrapped her arms around him, pulling his head against her chest. Marco's shoulders shook with silent sobs, years of grief pouring out in the darkness. "After they died, I tried to leave it all behind," he whispered against her. "I went legitimate, cleaned up my businesses, cut ties with the people who'd used me. But you can't ever really leave, Evelyn. The past doesn't let you go that easily." "Is that why you have guards?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Why you're so careful?" "I won't lose someone else," Marco said fiercely, pulling back to look at her. "I won't lose you, or the baby. I don't care whose child it is biologically, Evelyn. If you let me, I'll protect both of you with everything I have." The declaration should have overwhelmed her, should have felt like too much, too fast, too intense. But looking into Marco's devastated face, Evelyn understood something fundamental. This wasn't about possession or control. This was about a man who'd lost everything trying desperately not to fail again. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Marco, we'll let you." They held each other in the darkness, two broken people trying to piece together something whole. And for a little while longer, it worked. But the past, as Marco had said, doesn't let go easily. And 3 weeks later, everything came crashing down. The call came while Evelyn was at a bookstore, browsing parenting guides and trying to feel prepared for the life growing inside her. Her phone rang with an unknown number, and some instinct made her answer. Evelyn. Richard's voice was cold, controlled. We need to talk. Her blood turned to ice. How did you get this number? I have my ways. Meet me at Rossi's in an hour. Come alone, or I'll make things very difficult for you. The line went dead. Evelyn stood frozen in the middle of the bookstore, her mind racing. Richard couldn't know about the baby. She'd been so careful. But the threat in his voice was unmistakable, and she knew her ex-husband well enough to understand that he never bluffed. She should call Marco, should tell him what was happening. But Richard had said to come alone, and some part of Evelyn still remembered what it felt like to be controlled by this man. Some part of her still flinched at the thought of disobeying, so she went. Rossi's was the restaurant where they'd had their rehearsal dinner back when Evelyn had still believed love could save them. Now it felt like a mausoleum, full of ghosts. Richard was waiting at a corner table, dressed in an expensive suit, his expression unreadable. Sit, he said. Evelyn sat, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach before she could stop herself. Richard's eyes tracked the movement, and something cold flickered across his face. You're pregnant, he said flatly. There was no point in denying it. Yes. How far along? 16 weeks. Richard did the math quickly, his jaw tightening. It's mine. Biologically, Evelyn said carefully. But nothing. Richard leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You're carrying my child, Evelyn. That makes you mine. And I always protect what's mine. I'm not yours, Evelyn said, forcing steel into her voice. We're divorced. This baby changes nothing. This baby changes everything. Richard pulled out his phone, turning it so she could see the screen. It showed a photograph, Evelyn and Marco, walking together near the penthouse, his hand on the small of her back. Your new boyfriend is Marco Valenti, Richard continued. Do you have any idea who he is? What he's done? Evelyn's mouth went dry. I know enough. You know nothing. Richard's smile was cruel. Marco Valenti used to run one of the most violent crime operations in the city. He's responsible for murders, extortion, human trafficking, and now you've put my child in his reach. That's not... He's legitimate now. He left that world. No one leaves that world, Evelyn. They just get better at hiding. Richard leaned back, his expression calculating. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to end this relationship with Valenti. You're going to move back into our old apartment, and you're going to let me raise my child properly. Absolutely not, Evelyn said, standing. Richard's hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to bruise. Sit. Down. The violence in his voice made her freeze. This was the Richard she remembered, the one who'd isolated her from friends, controlled her money, made her feel like nothing without him. For a moment, she was back in their marriage, small and powerless. Then she thought of Marco, of the way he'd held her on the bathroom floor, of his promise to protect her. Evelyn wrenched her arm free and stood. I'm leaving. Don't contact me again. If you walk out that door, Richard said quietly, I'll bury Valenti. I have contacts in law enforcement, Evelyn. One call from me and the Trekibulswosm. Tom, see, and they'll dig up every body he's buried. They'll destroy him. And when they take him down, you'll be alone with a baby and no one to protect you. The threat hung in the air, vicious and real. Evelyn's mind raced. She knew Richard was capable of following through, knew he had the connections, the resources, the vindictiveness. But she also knew that she'd rather face an uncertain future alone than spend another moment under Richard's control. Do what you have to do, Evelyn said quietly. But I'm done being afraid of you. She walked out before he could respond, her heart hammering, her hands shaking. By the time she reached Marco's penthouse, she was barely holding herself together. She burst through the door to find him in his office, on the phone, his expression darkening the moment he saw her face. I'll call you back, Marco said, ending the call immediately. He crossed to her in 3 strides. What happened? Evelyn told him everything, Richard's threats, the photograph, the ultimatum. Marco's face grew colder with every word, his hands clenching into fists. He's not going to touch you, Marco said when she finished. Or the baby. I'll handle this. He threatened to expose your past, Evelyn said desperately. He has contacts in law enforcement, Marco. I know what he could do. Marco's voice was frighteningly calm. But you need to trust me, Evelyn. I've dealt with men like Richard before. He's playing a game he doesn't understand the rules to. What are you going to do? Marco cupped her face, his gray eyes intense. Whatever it takes to keep you safe. But I need you to promise me something. What? Don't meet with him again. Don't answer his calls. Don't give him any access to you. Marco's thumb brushed her cheekbone. If he contacts you, you come straight to me. Do you understand? Evelyn nodded, but fear was coiling in her stomach. Marco, I don't want you doing anything that will... I won't get caught, Marco interrupted gently. I promise you, Evelyn, Richard Cross will never hurt you again. The certainty in his voice should have reassured her. Instead, it terrified her. Because Evelyn was beginning to understand that Marco's protection came with a cost, and that cost was measured in the kind of violence she'd tried so hard to escape. That night, as she lay in bed unable to sleep, Evelyn felt her baby move for the first time, a definite, unmistakable kick against her hand. She pressed her palm against her growing belly and made a decision that would shape everything that came after. She would protect this child, no matter what it took, no matter who she had to run from, even if that meant running from the man who'd sworn to keep her safe. But she didn't run that night, or the next, because Marco was careful, controlled, and nothing in their daily life changed. He was attentive, loving, everything she needed him to be. And Richard went silent. For 2 weeks, there were no calls, no threats, no contact. Evelyn let herself believe it was over. Let herself imagine that maybe Marco had handled it quietly, cleanly, and they could move forward. She was wrong. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Richard Cross, prominent businessman, found dead in his office from an apparent suicide. No note, no clear motive. Just another tragedy in a city full of them. Evelyn saw the headline on Marco's laptop while he was in the shower, and her entire world tilted. She knew. Without proof, without evidence, without anything concrete. She knew. When Marco emerged dressed and ready for his day, Evelyn was still sitting at the counter, staring at the screen. "Did you do this?" she asked quietly. Marco followed her gaze to the headline. His expression didn't change. Yes. The simple honesty of it stole her breath. He was going to hurt you, Marco continued calmly. He was going to use the baby to control you. I removed the threat. You killed him. Evelyn's voice sounded distant to her own ears. I protected you. Marco crossed to her, his movements careful. Evelyn, look at me. She did, and what she saw in his eyes made her stomach turn. Not remorse, not even regret. Just cold, absolute certainty that what he'd done was justified. I can't. Evelyn stood abruptly. I need to go. Evelyn, please don't follow me. Her voice broke. I need time to think. Marco let her go, and that might have been the worst part. He simply watched as she gathered her things and walked out, his expression carefully neutral, his hands at his sides, as if he'd known all along that this moment would come, as if he'd accepted it already. Evelyn made it halfway home before she had to pull over, her hands shaking too badly to drive. She sat in her car on a random side street and tried to process what had just happened. Richard was dead. Her ex-husband, the father of her baby, was dead because Marco had decided he was a threat. And the most terrifying part? Some small, dark corner of Evelyn's mind felt relieved. She hated herself for it, hated that she couldn't summon proper grief, proper horror, because underneath the shock and fear, all she could think was, I'm free. My baby is free. We're finally, truly free. But freedom bought with blood wasn't freedom at all. It was just another kind of prison. That night, Evelyn made a decision. She would disappear. She would take her baby and vanish into a life where Marco Valenti's protection couldn't reach her, where his world of violence and control couldn't touch them. She would run, and she wouldn't look back. She had no way of knowing that 5 years later that decision would circle back, that the daughter she raised alone would need the one thing Evelyn had sworn never to ask for. That blood, Marco Valenti's blood, would be the only thing standing between her child and death. But that night, Evelyn only knew one truth. She had to run. So she did. The bus station smelled of diesel fuel and desperation. Evelyn sat on a hard plastic bench with a single duffel bag at her feet, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. 4 months pregnant, running on 3 hours of sleep and whatever courage she could scrape together. The departures board flickered overhead, listing destinations that all sounded equally foreign. Portland, Seattle, Boston, Chicago. Places where Marco Valenti's reach might not extend. Places where she could build a life that didn't include blood on the foundation. She'd left everything behind. The penthouse keys on the counter, her phone, the one Marco had given her, powered off and discarded in a trash can 6 blocks away. She'd withdrawn the small amount of cash she'd managed to save before Richard had controlled her finances, bought a cheap prepaid phone, and walked out of her apartment before dawn with nothing but clothes and the growing certainty that staying would destroy her. The television mounted in the corner of the station was playing the morning news. Richard's death was still the lead story. Prominent businessman. Apparent suicide. Authorities investigating. They showed footage of his office building, police tape across the entrance, speculation about financial troubles or personal crisis. No mention of Marco Valenti. No suggestion of foul play, because Marco was careful. Marco was thorough. Marco had made it look exactly like what he needed it to look like. Evelyn forced herself to look away from the screen. She couldn't think about that now. Couldn't let herself process what it meant that a man was dead because of her, because of the baby, because Marco had decided protection meant elimination. Boston, she whispered to herself. I'll go to Boston. It was far enough, big enough to disappear in, and she'd visited once during college, back when her life had still held possibility instead of just survival. She bought the ticket with cash and boarded the bus without looking back. As the city disappeared behind her through the grimy window, Evelyn made herself a promise. She would never tell her child about Marco Valenti, about the man who'd killed for them before they were even born, about the brief, beautiful, terrible weeks when she'd felt safe in the arms of someone dangerous. This baby would grow up knowing only peace, only safety, only love without violence attached to it. Evelyn pressed her hand against her belly and felt the baby kick, as if in agreement. She had no way of knowing that promises made in desperation rarely survive contact with reality. Boston welcomed her with cold rain and indifferent crowds. Evelyn found a women's shelter first, her pregnant belly earning her a bed and sympathetic looks from intake staff who'd clearly seen this story before. Young woman, alone, running from something. They didn't ask for details and she didn't offer them, just took the threadbare blanket and the list of resources and tried to figure out how to build a life from nothing. The first month was brutal. She cleaned office buildings at night, her back aching, her feet swelling, the baby growing heavier with each passing week. She saved every penny she could, sleeping in the shelter and eating whatever donated food was available. When she wasn't working, she was at the public library, researching how to get a new social security number, how to change her identity legally, how to disappear. It turned out disappearing was expensive, but Evelyn was nothing if not determined, and desperation made her resourceful in ways she'd never known she could be. She found a lawyer who worked with domestic violence survivors, a woman named Patricia Chen, who took one look at Evelyn's situation and agreed to help pro bono. Patricia didn't ask too many questions about why Evelyn needed a clean break from her past. She just filed the paperwork for a legal name change, helped Evelyn navigate the bureaucracy, and handed her tissues when the stress became too much. "You're doing the right thing," Patricia said one afternoon as they reviewed documents. "Whatever you're running from, your child deserves a fresh start." Evelyn wanted to believe her. But at night, alone in her shelter bed, she thought about Marco. Wondered if he was looking for her. Wondered if he'd figured out where she'd gone. She'd covered her tracks as best she could, but Marco had resources she couldn't even comprehend. If he wanted to find her, could she really stay hidden? The fear kept her moving, kept her careful, kept her looking over her shoulder even when logic said she was far enough away to breathe. By her 7th month of pregnancy, Evelyn had a new name, Evelyn Price. The surname felt safe, anonymous, unremarkable. She'd found a tiny studio apartment in a working-class neighborhood where rent was cheap and neighbors minded their own business. She had a job cleaning houses for wealthy families in the suburbs, work that paid under the table and didn't ask for references she couldn't provide. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And more importantly, it was safe. The baby arrived on a freezing January night, 3 weeks early, and in a rush that left Evelyn barely time to get to the hospital. She labored alone. No partner to hold her hand, no family to call with the news, just her and the nurses and the overwhelming, terrifying reality of bringing a life into the world. When they finally placed her daughter in her arms, Evelyn looked into those tiny, perfect features and felt something in her chest crack open. "Luna," she whispered. "Your name is Luna. Like the moon, like light in darkness. Like hope when everything else had been stripped away." Luna had dark hair, Marco's hair, and gray eyes that would probably change but for now looked startlingly familiar. Evelyn told herself she couldn't see him in this tiny face, told herself that biology didn't matter, that Luna was hers alone. But when Luna wrapped her impossibly small hand around Evelyn's finger, Evelyn thought about Marco holding her on the bathroom floor, about the reverence in his voice when he'd felt the baby move, about the promise he'd made to protect them both. And she wondered, not for the first time, if running had been courage or cowardice. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Luna. "I'm sorry you'll never know your father, either of them. But I promise you'll be safe. I promise you'll be loved. That's enough. It has to be enough." Luna made a small sound, something between a sigh and a whimper, and Evelyn held her closer. In that moment, she meant every word. She believed she could make it enough. The years passed with the strange speed of early motherhood. Luna grew from infant to toddler to a bright, curious 4-year-old who asked 1,000 questions and loved books the way Evelyn once had. They lived small, careful lives. Evelyn worked multiple jobs, cleaning, tutoring, anything that kept them afloat without putting them in databases or systems that could be traced. She homeschooled Luna, partly because she couldn't afford private school and partly because she was terrified of leaving any official records. They moved twice in those first 4 years, always to different neighborhoods, always paying cash, always keeping their circle small. Luna had friends at the park, at the library, but Evelyn never let relationships deepen, never gave other mothers her phone number or address, never risked the kind of connections that could lead to questions about their past. It was exhausting, isolating. Sometimes Evelyn lay awake at night and wondered what her life would have been if she'd stayed, if she'd accepted Marco's protection despite the blood that came with it, if she'd let herself love him despite knowing what he was capable of. But then she'd look at Luna, safe, healthy, untouched by violence, and she'd know she'd made the right choice. Until she didn't. Luna's 5th birthday came with a gift Evelyn had never imagined: illness. It started small. Bruises that appeared without cause. Fatigue that no amount of rest could fix. Luna, who'd always been energetic and bright, suddenly couldn't make it through a day without napping. When she started complaining that her bones hurt, Evelyn finally broke her cardinal rule and took her daughter to a hospital. The pediatrician ordered blood tests, then more tests, then a consultation with a specialist whose expression told Evelyn everything she needed to know before he even spoke. "Mrs. Price," the doctor said gently, "Luna has acute lymphoblastic leukemia." The words didn't make sense at first. Evelyn heard them, understood them individually, but together they formed something impossible. Luna was 5. Luna was healthy. Luna couldn't have cancer. "Are you sure?" Evelyn's voice came from somewhere far away. "Could it be something else?" "I'm afraid not." The doctor pulled up images on his computer screen, pointing to numbers and blood counts that meant nothing to Evelyn but clearly meant everything to him. "The good news is that all has a high cure rate in children, especially when caught early. We'll start chemotherapy immediately." "And if the chemotherapy doesn't work?" The doctor hesitated. "Then we consider a bone marrow transplant. But let's focus on first-line treatment for now." Evelyn nodded mechanically, her mind already spinning ahead to logistics. Chemotherapy meant regular hospital visits. Hospital visits meant records. Records meant a trail that could be followed. But none of that mattered, not compared to Luna's life. "Whatever she needs," Evelyn said. "I'll do whatever she needs." The next 6 months were a nightmare of hospital corridors and medical jargon and watching her daughter suffer through treatments that were supposed to save her, but looked like torture. Luna lost her beautiful dark hair, lost weight, lost the brightness that had always made her seem like she was lit from within. She was so small in the hospital bed, so fragile. And every time Evelyn looked at her, she felt her heart being carved out piece by piece. The chemotherapy helped at first. Luna's counts improved. The doctors smiled and talked about remission. Evelyn let herself hope. Then Luna relapsed. The doctor called Evelyn into his office alone, his expression grave. The leukemia has returned, and it's more aggressive this time. We need to move to a bone marrow transplant immediately. Okay, Evelyn said. Test me. I'll be the donor. We already did. You're not a match. The words hit like a physical blow. What do you mean? I'm her mother. Parents are only the 50% match about 25% of the time, the doctor explained gently. We've checked the National Registry. There are a few partial matches, but nothing close enough to give Luna the best chance. We need to find her biological father. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. That's not possible. Mrs. Price, I understand this might be complicated. He's dead. The lie came automatically, desperately. Luna's father died before she was born. The doctor's expression softened with sympathy. I'm so sorry. Did he have any family, siblings who might be willing to test? No, no one. Evelyn's mind was racing, panic clawing at her throat. She couldn't tell them the truth. Couldn't explain that Luna's biological father was a man who'd never known she existed, who thought Evelyn had simply vanished, who lived in a world of violence and power that she'd sworn to keep her daughter away from. What about the registry? Evelyn asked desperately. You said there were partial matches. There are, but partial matches carry higher risks, graft versus host disease, rejection, complications. A full match would give Luna the best possible outcome. The doctor leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Price, I need you to think very carefully. Is there anyone from Luna's father's side who could be tested? Anyone at all? Evelyn thought about Richard, dead for 5 years now. His parents were both deceased, no siblings, no extended family that she knew of. Even if there were relatives, Richard's DNA wasn't the issue. Because Richard wasn't Luna's biological father, Marco was. The realization had hit Evelyn when Luna was about 6 months old and her eyes had stayed that distinctive gray, when her features had started to sharpen into something that looked nothing like Richard and everything like the man who'd held Evelyn in the darkness and promised to protect her. She'd pushed the knowledge away, refused to examine it too closely. Because acknowledging that Marco was Luna's father meant acknowledging that she'd stolen his child, that she'd run with a piece of him he didn't know existed, but now that truth was the only thing that could save Luna's life. I need to think about this, Evelyn said quietly. Please, just give me some time. Time is something Luna doesn't have much of, the doctor said. I'm sorry to be blunt, Mrs. Price, but without a transplant, her prognosis is measured in months, maybe weeks if she continues to decline. Evelyn left the hospital in a daze. She picked Luna up from her friend's mother, one of the few relationships she'd allowed born of necessity, and drove home in silence while her daughter dozed in the back seat. That night, after Luna was asleep, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with her old laptop and did something she'd sworn never to do. She searched for Marco Valenti. The results were immediate and overwhelming. Marco had expanded his empire in the 5 years since she'd left. He was everywhere. Business journals, society pages, philanthropic organizations. His companies were worth billions now, all legitimate as far as she could tell. Real estate, investments, venture capital. He'd done exactly what he'd said he'd do, left his past behind and built something clean. There were photos, Marco at charity galas in tailored tuxedos, Marco cutting ribbons at new developments, Marco shaking hands with politicians and business leaders. In every photo, his expression was carefully controlled, professional, distant. But Evelyn had seen him break, had seen the man beneath the armor, and she couldn't help but wonder if he'd ever thought about her, about the woman who'd disappeared the morning after Richard's death without explanation or goodbye. She found his business address easily enough. His company headquarters was in the same city she'd fled from, a sleek glass tower in the financial district. Getting to him would be simple. Telling him about Luna would be impossible. Evelyn closed the laptop and pressed her hands against her face. This was the choice she'd spent 5 years running from. Safety or salvation. Pride or survival. Her daughter's life hung in the balance. And for the first time since she'd bought that bus ticket, Evelyn allowed herself to consider the possibility that she'd made the wrong choice. The decision came 3 days later when Luna collapsed at the park. One moment she was on the swings, laughing weakly, trying to be brave. The next she was on the ground, unconscious, her lips blue, her small body limp in Evelyn's arms. The ambulance, the emergency room, doctors moving with controlled urgency. Terms like sepsis and critical condition, and we're doing everything we can. Evelyn stood outside Luna's hospital room, watching through the window as nurses worked over her daughter's too-still form and made a decision that should have been impossible but was somehow the easiest thing in the world. She would find Marco Valenti. She would tell him the truth. She would beg him to save the daughter he'd never known existed. And if that meant stepping back into the world she'd fled, if it meant facing the man whose violence had sent her running, if it meant shattering the careful life she'd built, so be it. Luna was dying. Nothing else mattered. Evelyn pulled out her phone, the new one, the one with the number no one from her old life had, and searched for Marco's office number. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial. A professional voice answered. "Valenti Enterprises, how may I direct your call?" "I need to speak with Marco Valenti," Evelyn said. "It's urgent." "Mr. Valenti doesn't take unsolicited calls. If you'd like to leave a message with his assistant, tell him it's Evelyn Cross." The name felt strange in her mouth after 5 years of being Evelyn Price. "Tell him it's about his daughter." There was a pause. "Please hold." The wait felt eternal. Evelyn watched through the window as a doctor checked Luna's vitals, his expression grave. Her baby. Her little girl. The only good thing Evelyn had ever made. "This is Marco Valenti." The voice hit her like a physical force. Deeper than she remembered, rougher, but unmistakably him. For a moment, Evelyn couldn't speak. "Evelyn?" Marco's voice changed, losing its professional edge. "Is this really you?" "Yes," she managed. "Where are you? Are you safe? I've been—" He stopped, seeming to collect himself. "You said something about a daughter." "Her name is Luna. She's 5 years old." Evelyn's voice broke. "And she's dying, Marco. She has leukemia and she needs a bone marrow transplant, and The words caught in her throat. "She's yours. Luna is your daughter, and I need you to save her." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Evelyn thought he'd hung up. Then, "Where are you?" "Boston. Children's Hospital. Don't move. Don't go anywhere." Marco's voice was steady, controlled, but underneath it Evelyn could hear something raw. "I'm coming." "Marco." "I'm coming, Evelyn. Just stay there. Keep her safe. I'm coming." The line went dead. Evelyn lowered the phone, her entire body shaking. She'd done it. She'd shattered the wall she'd built between her past and present. She'd let Marco Valenti back into her life, and she had no idea if she'd just saved her daughter or doomed them both. Marco arrived 8 hours later. Evelyn was sitting in the waiting room, existing in that strange liminal space between exhaustion and hypervigilance that parents of sick children knew too well. She heard his voice before she saw him, calm, authoritative, speaking to someone at the nurse's station. "I'm looking for Luna Price. I'm family." Then he was there, standing in the doorway of the waiting room, and Evelyn's breath caught. 5 years had changed him. His hair had touches of gray at the temples now. There were new lines around his eyes, a hardness to his jaw that hadn't been there before. He wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than Evelyn made in 6 months, and he had the bearing of someone who'd spent the intervening years building empires. But his eyes, those gray eyes that Luna had inherited, were exactly the same. They locked onto Evelyn, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. "Evelyn," Marco said quietly. She stood on shaking legs. "Thank you for coming." "Where is she?" Evelyn led him down the corridor to Luna's room. Through the window, Luna was visible, tiny and pale against white sheets, hooked up to machines that beeped and whirred, her bald head stark against the pillow. Marco stopped walking. Evelyn watched his face carefully, saw the exact moment the reality of it hit him. This wasn't abstract. This wasn't a phone call or a theoretical situation. This was a child, his child, fighting for her life. "She has your eyes," Evelyn whispered. "And your hair." "Well, she did before the chemotherapy." Marco's hand came up to press against the glass, his fingers spreading as if he could touch her through the barrier. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice rough. So Evelyn did. She told him about the diagnosis, the failed treatments, the relapse, about how she wasn't a match and the registry had no full matches, about how the doctors had given Luna weeks, maybe months, without a transplant. Marco listened without interrupting, his gaze never leaving Luna's small form. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally. 5 years, Evelyn. 5 years you kept this from me." "I was scared," Evelyn said simply. "Richard died, and I knew you'd done it, and I couldn't raise a child in that world, Marco. I couldn't let her grow up surrounded by violence." "So you let her grow up without a father instead." There was no accusation in his voice, just a statement of fact. "Yes." Evelyn met his gaze. "And I'd do it again, Marco. I'd make the same choice. Because until 3 days ago, she was safe, she was healthy, she was happy. And now she's dying because you were too proud to ask for help." The words cut deep because they were true. Evelyn felt tears slip down her cheeks. I know I was wrong. I know I should have," her voice broke. "But I'm asking now, please, Marco, please save her. I'll do whatever you want. I'll go wherever you say. I'll give you anything. Just please don't let my daughter die because of my mistakes." Marco turned to face her fully. His expression was carefully controlled, but his eyes held something that might have been pain. "She's not just your daughter, Evelyn. She's mine too. I know. And you kept her from me." Marco's jaw tightened. "You took that choice away from me. Do you have any idea what that—" He stopped, visibly collecting himself. "We'll discuss this later. Right now, Luna needs me." He pushed open the door to Luna's room and walked inside. Evelyn followed, her heart in her throat. Luna was awake, barely. Her eyes flickered open as Marco approached the bed. She looked so small, so fragile, and when she spoke, her voice was thin as paper. "Who are you?" she asked. Marco sat carefully in the chair beside her bed, his movements gentle. "My name is Marco. I'm a friend of your mother's." Luna's gaze shifted to Evelyn, questioning. Evelyn managed a shaky nod. "Are you a doctor?" Luna asked. "No," Marco said softly. "But I'm here to help you get better." "How?" Marco glanced at Evelyn, and she could see him struggling with how much to say. Finally, he looked back at Luna and took her small hand in his much larger one. "I'm going to give you something you need," Marco said. "A part of me that will help your body fight the sickness." "Like a superpower?" Luna's voice held a thread of interest. "Exactly like a superpower," Marco agreed. "But you have to be very brave." "I am brave," Luna said. "Mommy says I'm the bravest girl she knows." Something in Marco's expression cracked. "I believe it," he said roughly. "And I promise you, Luna, I'm going to do everything I can to make you better." Luna studied him with those gray eyes, his eyes, and Evelyn held her breath. "Okay," Luna said finally. "I trust you." 3 words. Simple and devastating. Marco's hand tightened around Luna's. "Thank you," he whispered. He stayed there, holding their daughter's hand, until Luna drifted back to sleep. Then he stood and walked past Evelyn, without a word, back out into the corridor. Evelyn followed him, her heart pounding. Marco stopped near the windows overlooking the parking lot, his back to her, his shoulders tense. "I'll be tested immediately," he said without turning around. "If I'm a match, we'll schedule the transplant as soon as possible." "Thank you," Evelyn said quietly. "Don't thank me." Marco turned, and the expression on his face was unlike anything Evelyn had seen before. Fury and grief and something raw and wounded. "Don't thank me for saving my daughter's life, Evelyn. This isn't a favor. This is what I should have been doing for the last 5 years if you hadn't stolen that chance from me." "Marco, I loved you." The words were quiet, but they hit like gunshots. When you disappeared, I looked for you for months. I used every resource I had, called in every favor, turned over every stone. And when I couldn't find you, when it became clear you didn't want to be found, I told myself you'd made your choice, that you were safe somewhere, starting over, and that I needed to respect that. Evelyn's throat was tight. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't stay long enough to find out. Marco took a step toward her, his voice dropping. I would have left everything for you, Evelyn. The business, the city, the past. If you told me you needed to disappear, I would have come with you. I would have protected you both without the violence you were so afraid of. I didn't think I had that choice, Evelyn whispered. You didn't give me the chance to offer it. Marco's hands clenched at his sides. But we can't change the past. We can only deal with what's in front of us. And what's in front of us is a 5-year-old girl who needs her father. The word hung in the air between them. Father. Evelyn had spent 5 years making sure Luna never had to know that word in relation to Marco. And now here he was, claiming it with the same quiet certainty he brought to everything else. If you're a match, Evelyn said carefully, what happens after the transplant? After? Marco's laugh was bitter. After, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about custody, Evelyn, because I've missed 5 years of my daughter's life. I don't intend to miss any more. The threat was clear, and for the first time since making the phone call, Evelyn realized that saving Luna's life might cost her everything else. The genetic testing came back in 48 hours. Marco was a perfect match. The doctors were thrilled, talking about how rare it was to find such genetic compatibility, how this gave Luna the best possible chance. They scheduled the transplant for the following week, explaining the process, how Marco's bone marrow would be extracted, processed, and transplanted into Luna's body, where it would hopefully rebuild her immune system and cure the leukemia. Marco listened to every word, asked intelligent questions, and signed consent forms without hesitation. Then he arranged for Luna to be moved to a private suite with round-the-clock nursing care, upgraded her treatment plan to include the best specialists in the country, and paid for everything without blinking. Evelyn watched it all happen with a growing sense of inevitability. This was what Marco did. He took control. He fixed problems. He made things happen through sheer force of will and unlimited resources. And she was letting him, because what choice did she have? The night before the transplant, Marco came to Luna's room and found Evelyn reading to their daughter. Luna was curled against her mother's side, drowsy from medications, listening to a story about a brave girl who flew to the moon. That's where my name comes from, Luna murmured. Luna means moon. I know, Marco said from the doorway. It's a beautiful name. Luna smiled sleepily. Mommy picked it. Marco's gaze met Evelyn's over Luna's head, and she saw everything in his expression, the pain, the loss, the 5 years of her choosing that name without him. Your mother has excellent taste, Marco said quietly. He waited until Luna fell asleep before speaking again. Can we talk? Outside? Evelyn carefully extracted herself from Luna's embrace and followed Marco into the corridor. He led her to a small waiting room at the end of the hall, empty and quiet. The transplant will take several hours, Marco said once they were alone. If everything goes well, Luna will need to stay in the hospital for another month, maybe longer. She'll be vulnerable to infection, rejection, complications. She'll need constant monitoring. I know, Evelyn said. I've read everything the doctors gave me. After she's released, she'll need a sterile environment. No crowds, no public places, careful control of everything she's exposed to. Marco leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. Your apartment isn't equipped for that. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. I'll make it work. I have a house, Marco interrupted. Outside the city. Private, secure, with enough space for live-in medical staff. I want you and Luna to stay there during her recovery. For how long? However long it takes. Marco's gaze was steady. Months, probably. Maybe a year. And then what? Evelyn asked. After she's better, what happens? That depends on you. Marco pushed off the wall, closing the distance between them. I'm Luna's father, Evelyn. That's not something you can run from anymore. But I'm not going to rip her away from you either, despite everything, despite what you did. His voice roughened. You're her mother. She loves you. Taking her from you would hurt her, and I won't do that. So what are you proposing? We raise her together. Marco's expression was serious. Not as a couple necessarily, but as parents. You live in my house, under my protection, and we figure out how to be a family, for Luna's sake. Evelyn's mind was reeling. You're asking me to give up my independence, my life. I'm asking you to put our daughter first, Marco corrected. Something you should have done 5 years ago. The accusation stung because it was fair, but Evelyn couldn't help pushing back. And if I say no? If I take Luna back to Boston after she recovers? Marco's expression went cold. Then I'll fight you for custody. And Evelyn, I promise you, I will win. I have resources you can't match, lawyers who could tie you up in court for years, and proof that you kept my daughter from me for her entire life. No judge would side with you. You'd really do that? Evelyn's voice shook. You'd take her from me? I'd do whatever it takes to be part of her life. Marco's voice was steel. I've already lost 5 years. I won't lose more. They stared at each other, the threat hanging between them. Evelyn knew he meant it, knew that Marco Valenti didn't make empty promises. Okay, she whispered finally. Okay, we'll stay. We'll try. Marco nodded once, his expression unreadable. The transplant is at 8 tomorrow morning. You should get some rest. He walked away without another word, leaving Evelyn alone in the empty waiting room. She sank into a chair and pressed her hands against her face. 5 years ago, she'd run from Marco to give her daughter a life free from violence and control. Now she was walking back into his world voluntarily, trading her freedom for Luna's survival. But as she thought about Luna's small face, her brave smile, her trust in the stranger who'd promised to save her, Evelyn knew she'd make the same choice again. Some sacrifices were worth making, even if they cost you everything. The morning of the transplant arrived with gray skies and cold rain beating against the hospital windows. Evelyn hadn't slept. She'd spent the night curled in the chair beside Luna's bed, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall, memorizing every detail of her face as if this might be the last time. The doctors had been optimistic, reassuring, full of statistics about survival rates and successful outcomes. But Evelyn had learned that numbers meant nothing when it came to the fragile thread of a child's life. Luna woke slowly, disoriented from the pre-procedure medications they'd given her an hour before. Her gray eyes, Marco's eyes, found Evelyn's face and held on like a lifeline. Is it time? Luna whispered. Almost, baby. Evelyn smoothed the non-existent hair back from Luna's forehead, the gesture automatic even though there was nothing there to smooth. Marco's getting ready too. He's going to give you that superpower we talked about, remember? Will it hurt? The question broke Evelyn's heart. You won't feel anything during the transplant. You'll be asleep. And when you wake up, I'll be right here. Promise? I promise. Evelyn pressed a kiss to Luna's forehead. I'm not going anywhere. The door opened and a nurse entered, followed by Marco. He was wearing a hospital gown over his clothes, prepared for the bone marrow extraction that would happen simultaneously with Luna's transplant. His face was calm, controlled, but Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. He crossed to Luna's bed and knelt so they were eye level. Good morning, brave girl. Luna managed a small smile. Good morning, Marco. I have something for you. Marco pulled a small stuffed animal from his pocket, a silver wolf with gray eyes that matched his own. This is Luna the wolf. She's very fierce and very brave, just like you. I thought she could keep you company while you're getting better. Luna took the wolf carefully, holding it against her chest. She's beautiful. So are you. Marco's voice was rough. And I promise you, Luna, when you wake up, you're going to start feeling better. The superpower is going to work. You're sure? I'm sure. Marco glanced at Evelyn, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. Fear, maybe, or hope. Your mother and I, we're both going to make sure you're okay. Luna looked between them, her young face serious. Are you and Mommy friends? The question hung in the air. Evelyn held her breath, waiting to see how Marco would answer. We used to be, Marco said carefully. And maybe we will be again, but Right now, we're both just people who love you very much. Okay, Luna said, satisfied with this answer in the way only children could be. I love you too, Marco. The words hit Marco visibly. His composure cracked, just for a moment, and Evelyn saw raw emotion flash across his face before he controlled it. He leaned forward and pressed a careful kiss to Luna's forehead. Thank you, he whispered. The surgical team arrived moments later, efficient and professional, explaining the procedure one more time even though everyone already knew the steps by heart. Evelyn held Luna's hand as they wheeled her toward the operating room, walking alongside the gurney until they reached the doors marked Authorized Personnel Only. I'll see you soon, baby, Evelyn said, her voice steady even though she was breaking inside. Be brave. I'm always brave, Luna said sleepily, the sedatives already pulling her under. You said so. Then they took her through the doors and she was gone. Evelyn stood in the empty corridor, her hand still extended where Luna's had been, feeling like someone had carved out her chest. Marco appeared beside her, his presence solid and grounding. She's strong, he said quietly. She'll make it through this. You don't know that. Evelyn's voice was hollow. No one knows that. I know. Marco turned to face her fully. Because she's yours. And if there's one thing I learned about you, Evelyn, it's that you don't give up. You survive. Luna has that in her. Before Evelyn could respond, a nurse approached Marco. Mr. Valenti, we're ready for you. Marco nodded. He looked at Evelyn one more time, something unspoken passing between them. Then he followed the nurse down a different corridor toward his own procedure. Evelyn was left alone in the waiting room with nothing but her fear and her guilt and the crushing weight of all the choices that had led them here. Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Evelyn sat in the same chair, unable to eat, unable to focus on anything except the clock on the wall. Other families came and went, their own dramas playing out in hushed conversations and tear-stained faces. But Evelyn barely registered them. Her entire world had narrowed to 2 operating rooms, and the people fighting for survival inside them. A doctor appeared in the doorway, Dr. Chen, Luna's oncologist. Evelyn was on her feet instantly. How is she? The transplant went perfectly, Dr. Chen said with a tired smile. We've infused Marco's bone marrow into Luna's system, and so far her body is accepting it beautifully. The next 48 hours will be critical, but all the signs are positive. Evelyn's knees went weak with relief. Can I see her? She's in recovery right now. Give us another hour to get her settled, then you can visit. Dr. Chen's expression softened. You should be proud, Mrs. Price. Luna fought hard today, and Mr. Valenti... She paused. I've never seen a donor so determined. He wouldn't let us sedate him until he knew Luna was stable. Is he okay? Uncomfortable, but fine. The extraction is painful, but he'll recover quickly. Dr. Chen glanced at her tablet. He's asking for you, actually. Room 342. Evelyn hesitated. Every instinct told her to wait for Luna, to be there the moment her daughter woke. But Marco had just given part of himself to save their child. The least she could do was check on him. I'll be quick, she said. Room 342 was in a different wing, quieter and more private. Evelyn knocked softly before entering. Marco was sitting up in bed, his face pale but composed. An IV ran into his arm, and there were monitors beeping softly beside him. He looked tired in a way she'd never seen before, not just physically exhausted, but emotionally drained. Hey, Evelyn said quietly. Hey, Marco's voice was rough. How's Luna? Good. The transplant went well. Dr. Chen said she's accepting the bone marrow. Evelyn stepped closer to the bed. How are you? I've had worse. Marco shifted slightly and winced, though I'd forgotten how much this particular procedure hurts. You've done this before? Once. Years ago. He stopped, his expression closing off. For someone who needed it. Evelyn wondered if he meant his son, the little boy who died in the car accident that was meant for Marco. She wanted to ask, to finally have the conversations they'd never finished 5 years ago. But the exhaustion on Marco's face stopped her. Thank you, she said instead, for doing this, for saving her. Don't. Marco's voice was sharp. Don't thank me for being a father to my daughter, Evelyn. That's not something you get to make extraordinary. The words stung, but she deserved them. You're right. I'm sorry. Marco was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those gray eyes that saw too much. Do you know what the worst part was? All those months I spent looking for you, I told myself that if something had happened, if you were hurt or in danger, I would have known. I would have felt it somehow. Marco, but you weren't in danger. You were just gone. You'd made a choice to erase me from your life so completely that even when you were carrying my child, you didn't think I deserved to know. His voice was quiet, but the pain underneath was devastating. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Evelyn felt tears burning behind her eyes. I was trying to protect her. From what? From having a father who would have died for her? Marco's jaw tightened. I know what I did to Richard. I know that scared you, but Evelyn, that was the only time. The only time in 5 years of leaving that world behind that I crossed that line. And I did it because he was threatening you and the baby. I know that now, Evelyn whispered. But then all I could see was that you'd killed someone, that you were capable of that kind of violence. And I couldn't risk Luna growing up in a world where that was normal. So instead, she grew up without a father at all. Marco closed his eyes. Do you think that was better? I don't know. The admission cost her. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being strong, independent, protecting her from something dangerous. But maybe I was just being a coward. Marco opened his eyes, and something in his expression had shifted. You're a lot of things, Evelyn, but you're not a coward. Cowards don't survive 5 years alone with a child. Cowards don't walk into a hospital and call the person they've been running from to save their daughter's life. Then what am I? Human. Marco's voice was softer now. Scared and human and trying to do your best with impossible choices. Just like the rest of us. The understanding in his words nearly broke her. Evelyn sank into the chair beside his bed, all the fight draining out of her. I don't know how to do this, Marco. How to be around you again. How to let you into Luna's life without losing myself in the process. We'll figure it out. Marco reached for her hand, his grip weak but steady. For Luna's sake, we'll figure it out. His hand was warm in hers, calloused and familiar despite the years apart. Evelyn held on and let herself believe him. They sat like that until a nurse came to check Marco's vitals, breaking the moment. Evelyn stood reluctantly. I should get back to Luna. She'll be waking up soon. Go! Marco squeezed her hand once before releasing it. Tell her I'll come see her as soon as they let me up. I will. Evelyn left before she could say anything else, before she could acknowledge the way her heart had stuttered when Marco touched her, before she could examine too closely what it meant that being near him still felt like coming home after years in the wilderness. Luna was being transferred to her room when Evelyn returned. She was pale and groggy, surrounded by machines and monitors, but her eyes opened when Evelyn took her hand. Mommy? I'm here, baby. Right here. Evelyn pressed a kiss to Luna's fingers. You did so good. So brave. Did it work? Do I have the superpower now? You do. Evelyn's voice was thick with tears. Marco's superpower is inside you, helping you get better. Luna's lips curved in a small smile. Good. I like Marco. I'm glad, Evelyn whispered. Will he come visit me? As soon as he can, he promised. Luna's eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion and medication pulling her back under, but she held tight to Evelyn's hand and to the little wolf Marco had given her, as if both could anchor her through the difficult days ahead. Evelyn settled into the chair beside the bed, prepared for the long vigil of recovery. And as she watched her daughter sleep, machines breathing for her and IV lines feeding medicine into her small body, Evelyn made herself a new promise. She would do whatever it took to give Luna the life she deserved, even if that meant sharing custody with Marco, even if it meant living under his protection and facing the past she'd run from. Because Luna was alive. Luna had a chance, and that was worth any sacrifice. The next 2 weeks were a blur of medical procedures, cautious optimism, and the strange dance of co-parenting with a man who was simultaneously a stranger and achingly familiar. Marco recovered from the extraction quickly, as the doctors had predicted. Within 3 days, he was back in Luna's room, sitting beside her bed and reading stories or playing quiet games when she had the energy. He was patient and gentle, learning her preferences and fears, figuring out how to make her smile even when she felt terrible. Evelyn watched their relationship develop with mixed emotions. Joy, because Luna deserved a father who looked at her like she hung the moon. Fear, because every moment they spent together was another thread binding them to Marco's world, and something else she didn't want to name. Something that felt dangerously like hope. "Tell me about Boston," Marco said one afternoon while Luna napped. They were sitting in the small parent lounge, both exhausted from the constant vigilance required by Luna's fragile condition. Evelyn wrapped her hands around a cup of terrible hospital coffee. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Where you lived, what you did, how you survived." Marco's gaze was steady. "I want to understand the life you built for her." So Evelyn told him about the women's shelter and the night cleaning jobs, about the studio apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots sometimes echoed after dark, about homeschooling Luna because she couldn't risk the paper trail of enrollment, about every birthday celebrated alone, every milestone marked without family, every moment of triumph and terror experienced in isolation. Marco listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "You should have had help," he said when she finished. "You shouldn't have had to do all that alone." "I made my choice." That doesn't mean it was the right one." Marco set down his own coffee cup. "Evelyn, I need you to understand something. When you disappeared, I didn't just lose you. I lost the possibility of the family I'd been starting to believe I could have again. After Sofia and Matteo died, I thought that part of my life was over. Then you appeared, and for the first time in years, I felt something other than grief." "Marco." "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," he interrupted. "I'm telling you because I need you to understand what's at stake now. Luna is my second chance. My chance to be the father I couldn't be for Matteo, and I won't walk away from that, Evelyn. No matter what happens between us, I won't walk away from her." "I know," Evelyn said quietly. "I'm not asking you to." "Aren't you?" Marco leaned forward. "Because every time I see you look at me, I can see you planning your escape, figuring out how long you have to stay before you can run again." The accuracy of the observation made Evelyn flinch. "I'm not—" "Yes, you are, and I understand why. But I need you to stop running long enough to see what's actually in front of you." Marco's voice dropped. "I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago, Evelyn. I've spent this entire time building a life that's clean, legitimate, safe. The kind of life where a child could grow up protected without being corrupted. People don't change that much. No, they don't change who they are. But they can change what they do with it." Marco's gaze was intense. "I'm still capable of violence when necessary. I won't lie to you about that, but I've built systems, safeguards, distance between myself and that world. The house I want you and Luna to stay in, it's an hour outside the city, surrounded by security, staffed with people I trust. You'd be safe there, both of you." "Safe in a gilded cage," Evelyn said. "Safe in a home." Marco's jaw tightened. "There's a difference." Before Evelyn could respond, an alarm went off, loud and insistent. They both jumped up, racing back toward Luna's room. Nurses were already converging, moving with controlled urgency. "What's happening?" Evelyn demanded. "Her oxygen levels dropped," a nurse said, adjusting Luna's IV. "Possible rejection response. We're stabilizing her now." Evelyn tried to push into the room, but Marco caught her arm, holding her back as the medical team worked. Luna was awake, her eyes wide with fear, and Evelyn's heart shattered at not being able to comfort her. "Let them work," Marco said quietly, his grip firm but gentle. "Let them help her." It took 15 agonizing minutes before the crisis passed. The doctor emerged looking tired but not panicked. "False alarm," he said. "Just her body adjusting to the new bone marrow. It's actually a good sign, means the transplant is taking." Evelyn sagged against the wall, all the strength leaving her body. Marco was there immediately, his arm around her shoulders, holding her up. "She's okay," he murmured. "She's going to be okay." Evelyn turned into his chest without thinking, and Marco's arms came around her, steady and warm. She let herself break just a little, let out the fear she'd been holding since that first diagnosis. And Marco held her through it, his hand moving in slow circles on her back, his presence an anchor in the storm. "I can't lose her," Evelyn whispered against his shirt. "Marco, I can't." "You won't." Marco's voice was fierce. "I promise you, Evelyn, we won't lose her. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we'll keep her safe." And standing there in his arms, Evelyn let herself believe him. Over the following week, Luna's condition improved steadily. The rejection scare had indeed been her body adjusting to the transplant, and the new bone marrow was beginning to do its job. Her blood count started climbing. Color returned to her cheeks. She had more energy, more appetite, more of the spark that made her Luna. "When can we go home?" she asked one morning while Marco was visiting. Evelyn and Marco exchanged glances over her head. They'd been avoiding this conversation, but it couldn't be postponed forever. "Soon," Marco said carefully, "but you'll need to stay somewhere very clean and safe while you finish getting better. Somewhere with doctors nearby." "Like here?" Luna made a face. "I don't like hospitals." "Not a hospital," Marco said. "A house, with a yard and books and anything else you want. Your mom would be there too." Luna brightened. "Really? Can I have a dog?" "Luna," Evelyn started, but Marco spoke over her. "If your doctors say it's safe, yes, you can have a dog." Luna's smile was radiant. Evelyn wanted to be angry at Marco for making promises without consulting her, but she couldn't bring herself to care. Not when Luna looked that happy. Later, after Luna fell asleep, Evelyn confronted Marco in the hallway. "You can't just promise her things like that." "Why not?" "Because you don't know what the doctors will say. Because a dog is a huge responsibility. Because—" Evelyn stopped, struggling to articulate the real reason. "Because it makes it harder to leave eventually." Marco's expression went carefully neutral. "Is that still your plan? To leave?" "I don't know." The admission cost her. "Marco, I don't know what my plan is anymore. A month ago, I had a life, small and difficult, but mine. Now I'm standing here discussing custody arrangements and living situations with you, and I feel like I'm losing myself." "Or maybe you're finding yourself," Marco said quietly. "The version of yourself you were always meant to be, before circumstances forced you into survival mode." "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one being asked to give up everything." "Aren't I?" Marco stepped closer. "Evelyn, I spent 5 years building a life that was safe and empty. No real relationships, no family, nothing that could be used against me or taken away. Then you walked back into my world with a daughter I didn't know existed, and suddenly I have everything to lose again. That's different." "It's not." Marco's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. "We're both terrified, Evelyn. We're both risking everything. The only difference is I'm willing to admit it." Evelyn's breath caught. They were standing too close, the hospital corridor too quiet, the moment too intimate. Marco's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and she felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "I don't trust you," she whispered. "I know." Marco's voice was rough. "But maybe you could try." Before she could respond, footsteps echoed down the hall. They separated quickly, and a nurse appeared with update charts about Luna's progress. But the moment stayed with Evelyn long after. The feel of Marco's hand on her face, the vulnerability in his eyes, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong about what running had protected her from. That night, alone in the parent sleeping room the hospital provided, Evelyn made a decision. She would go to Marco's house. She would let Luna recover there, surrounded by the resources and protection Marco could provide. She would try, really try, to trust him again. Not for herself, for Luna. But as she lay in the dark, Evelyn couldn't quite convince herself that was the only reason. The discharge papers were signed on a Tuesday morning, exactly 23 days after the transplant. Luna was wheeled out of the hospital in a wheelchair she didn't really need, clutching her wolf and wearing a surgical mask to protect her still fragile immune system. Evelyn walked beside her, carrying 2 bags of belongings and medical supplies. And Marco led the way, clearing a path through the hospital corridors, with the quiet authority that came so naturally to him. A black SUV was waiting at the entrance, along with a woman in medical scrubs who Marco introduced as Dr. Sarah Morrison, Luna's private nurse. "It's lovely to meet you both," Dr. Morrison said with a warm smile. "I've prepared everything at the house according to the hospital's specifications. Luna will be very comfortable." The drive took just over an hour, leaving the city behind for rolling countryside. The house, when it finally appeared at the end of a long private drive, was nothing like Evelyn expected. It wasn't a mansion. It was a home, sprawling and beautiful, but warm rather than ostentatious. Stone and wood, and large windows that let in natural light. Gardens that looked wild but were clearly carefully tended. And surrounding it all, discreet security measures that Evelyn only noticed because she was looking for them. "Welcome," Marco said quietly as the SUV stopped at the front entrance. Luna pressed her face against the window, her eyes wide. "It's like a castle," she breathed. "It's better than a castle," Marco said. "Because this one is yours." He carried Luna inside despite her protests that she could walk, and Evelyn followed, her heart in her throat. The interior was exactly what the exterior promised: comfortable elegance without pretension. A home where someone could actually live rather than just exist. Marco showed them to Luna's room first, a suite on the ground floor with its own bathroom and a wall of windows overlooking the gardens. It was already furnished with a bed, bookshelves, and toys that looked carefully chosen for a 5-year-old girl. "How did you—" Evelyn started. "I had help," Marco said simply. "Dr. Morrison consulted on what would be appropriate." Luna was already exploring, her exhaustion forgotten in the excitement of the new space. She found a reading nook with pillows and blankets, a desk with art supplies, and to her absolute delight, a basket of stuffed animals. "This is mine?" she asked, wonder in her voice. "All yours," Marco confirmed. Luna turned to Evelyn. "Mommy, can we really stay here?" Evelyn looked at her daughter's hopeful face, then at Marco's carefully neutral expression. She thought about her cramped studio apartment in Boston, about 5 years of struggling and fear and isolation, about the choice in front of her now. "Yes," Evelyn said, the word feeling like both a surrender and a relief. "We can stay." Luna's smile was bright enough to chase away every shadow, and for the first time in 5 years, Evelyn let herself imagine what it might feel like to stop running. The first week at Marco's house passed in a careful rhythm of medical routines and tentative domesticity. Luna's room became the center of their universe. Dr. Morrison checked her vitals 3 times daily, adjusted medications, monitored for any signs of infection or rejection. Evelyn barely left her daughter's side, sleeping in the reading nook when Luna needed her close, hovering nearby even when the little girl insisted she felt fine. Marco appeared throughout the day like clockwork. Morning visits before he left for business calls in his home office. Lunch shared in Luna's room, the 3 of them eating carefully prepared meals that met all of Luna's dietary restrictions. Evening story time, where Marco's deep voice brought books to life in ways that made Luna's eyes shine with delight. He never pushed, never demanded more time than Evelyn was comfortable giving, but his presence was constant, steady, reshaping their small family unit in ways Evelyn hadn't anticipated. "Tell me about when you were little," Luna said one afternoon, curled up against Marco on her bed, while Evelyn sat nearby with medical charts. The request was directed at Marco, her curiosity about this man who'd appeared in her life like magic clearly outweighing any wariness. Marco glanced at Evelyn, as if asking permission. She nodded slightly, curious herself about what he would share. "I grew up in the city," Marco said, his hand absently stroking Luna's arm. "In a neighborhood that was loud and crowded and full of people who looked out for each other." "Like a family?" Luna asked. "Exactly like a family. My mother ran a small restaurant, and I spent most of my childhood in the kitchen, learning to cook and listening to the old men argue about soccer." Marco's voice held warmth that Evelyn had rarely heard. "I wasn't a very good student. I liked to build things with my hands instead of sitting still at a desk." "What kind of things?" "Models, mostly. Ships and buildings. Anything with intricate pieces that had to fit together perfectly." Marco smiled. "My mother used to say I had the patience of a craftsman, but the restlessness of a storm." Luna giggled. That doesn't make sense. Your grandmother was like that. She spoke in contradictions that somehow always turned out to be true. Something shadowed Marco's expression. She would have loved you. Where is she now? Luna asked with the innocent directness of childhood. She passed away a long time ago, Marco said gently. But I think she'd be very proud to know I have such a brave, smart daughter. Luna processed this quietly, then snuggled closer. I'm glad you're my dad, she said simply. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Evelyn's breath caught. She and Marco had been carefully avoiding that label, dancing around the biological truth while Luna recovered. But here it was, spoken with childlike clarity that cut through all their adult complications. Marco's arms tightened around Luna, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I'm glad too, little moon, more than you could possibly know. Evelyn turned away, blinking back tears. She'd spent 5 years protecting Luna from this exact moment, from knowing Marco, from loving him, from being loved by him in return. And now it was happening anyway, natural as breathing, and Evelyn couldn't decide if she'd failed or succeeded. That night, after Luna fell asleep clutching her wolf, Evelyn found Marco in the kitchen. He was cooking, something she'd learned he did when he needed to think. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air, homey and comforting. She called you Dad, Evelyn said quietly. Marco didn't turn from the stove. I heard. I haven't told her the whole truth yet, about you being her biological father. I thought it was too soon, too complicated while she's still recovering. But she knows anyway. Marco finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. Children are intuitive. She sees how we are with each other, how you defer to me about her care, how I look at her. She's putting the pieces together herself. Are you angry that I haven't told her? No. Marco turned off the burner and faced her fully. I understand wanting to protect her from complicated truths, but Evelyn, eventually she'll have questions. About why we don't live together as a family, about why you kept me from her, about what happened between us. We need to figure out what we're going to tell her. The truth, Evelyn said, though the word felt inadequate. When she's old enough to understand it. Which parts of the truth? Marco's voice was gentle but insistent. That you ran because I killed your ex-husband? That you were so afraid of me you disappeared for 5 years? That I didn't know she existed until she was dying? Each question landed like a blow. I don't know, Evelyn whispered. I don't know how to explain choices I'm not sure were right anymore. Marco crossed the distance between them, his movements careful. Then we tell her what we both know is true. That we cared about each other once. That circumstances pulled us apart. That we're both doing our best to be good parents now. Is that enough? It's honest. That's more than most children get. Marco's hand lifted toward her face, then dropped. We don't have to have all the answers, Evelyn. We just have to be present and try. The almost touch lingered between them, charged with everything they weren't saying. Evelyn's traitorous body swayed forward slightly, drawn to him despite all her reasons to keep distance. I should check on Luna, she said, stepping back before she could do something foolish. Evelyn, good night, Marco. She fled before he could say anything else, her heart hammering, because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Being near Marco didn't feel dangerous anymore. It felt like coming home, and that terrified her more than any threat ever had. The second week brought unexpected complications in the form of 3 black SUVs rolling up the driveway unannounced. Evelyn was reading with Luna in the garden when the vehicles arrived. Security materialized from seemingly nowhere, and Marco appeared from his office with an expression that made Evelyn's stomach drop. This was the other Marco, the one who commanded empires, who moved through dangerous worlds, who dealt with threats she didn't want to imagine. Take Luna inside, he said quietly to Evelyn. Stay in her room until I come get you. Marco, what's happening? Just old business, nothing for you to worry about. His voice was calm, but his eyes were steel. Please, Evelyn, trust me. She wanted to argue, to demand explanations, but Luna was looking between them with worried eyes, and whatever was happening, Evelyn didn't want her daughter exposed to it. Come on, baby, Evelyn said, standing and taking Luna's hand. Let's go inside and work on that puzzle we started. Luna went reluctantly, glancing back at Marco. Are you okay, Dad? The title still caught Evelyn off guard, but Marco smiled at Luna with genuine warmth. I'm perfect, little moon, just some boring adult business. I'll come see you when I'm done. Dr. Morrison met them at the door, her usually calm demeanor slightly strained. She ushered them to Luna's room and stayed nearby, and Evelyn realized the nurse had been briefed on whatever protocols existed for situations like this. Through the windows, Evelyn could see Marco meeting the visitors. 3 men in expensive suits, carrying themselves with the kind of authority that spoke of power and violence, kept barely leashed. The conversation looked civil from a distance, but she could read the tension in Marco's shoulders, the careful way he positioned himself between the house and the strangers. Who are they? Evelyn asked Dr. Morrison. I don't know, the nurse said honestly, but Mr. Valenti has measures in place for Luna's safety. You're both secure here. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. Then the SUVs drove away, and Marco stood alone in the driveway for a long moment before turning back to the house. He found them in Luna's room. Luna had grown tired of the puzzle and was napping, her face peaceful against the pillows. Marco's entire demeanor softened when he saw her sleeping. Is everything okay? Evelyn asked quietly. Yes, come with me. Marco gestured toward the door. She's safe with Dr. Morrison. Evelyn followed him to his office, a room she hadn't entered before. It was lined with books and dominated by a massive desk, professional but somehow still personal. Marco closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly looking exhausted. Who were they? Evelyn demanded. Associates from my old life. They heard I'd brought a woman and child to this house, and they wanted to make sure it wasn't a security risk. Marco's jaw tightened. I've worked hard to keep my current business completely separate from my past, but some connections never fully sever. Are we in danger? No. I made it very clear that you and Luna are off limits, completely protected. They won't come back. Marco pushed off from the door. But Evelyn, I need you to understand something. I've left that world, but it knows where to find me if necessary. This house is safe, you're safe, but my past exists. I can't erase it. I know. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself. Seeing those men, seeing you like that, it reminded me why I ran. I'm not that person anymore. Aren't you? Evelyn's voice rose despite her attempt to stay calm. You just had a meeting with criminals, Marco, in your driveway, while our daughter slept inside. I had a meeting with men from my past to ensure they understand that you and Luna are untouchable, Marco corrected, his voice hard. There's a difference. I didn't invite them here. I didn't engage in illegal activity. I simply made clear that my family is protected. The word family hung between them. We're not your family, Evelyn said, but the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. We're staying here until Luna recovers. Marco crossed to her in 3 strides, his presence overwhelming. You're the mother of my child. You're living under my roof, under my protection, and whether you want to admit it or not, we're building something here. That makes you family, Evelyn. I didn't agree to that. You agreed the moment you let Luna call me Dad. Marco's voice gentled. You agreed when you stayed for dinner last night instead of hiding in your room. You agreed every time you've chosen to trust me a little more. I'm just doing what's best for Luna. Keep telling yourself that. Marco's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone in a gesture that was becoming dangerously familiar. But we both know there's more happening here than co-parenting. Evelyn's breath caught. She should pull away, should remind him and herself of all the reasons this was a terrible idea, but she couldn't make herself move. Marco, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, he said quietly, but I need you to stop pretending you don't feel it too, the way things are shifting between us, the way it feels right when we're together. It felt right 5 years ago too, Evelyn whispered, and look how that ended. Because you ran before we could figure out how to make it work. Marco's forehead touched hers, the contact electric. Don't run this time, Evelyn. Please. Just stay and see what we could build. She was drowning in him, his scent, his warmth, the absolute certainty in his voice. Every rational thought was screaming at her to step back, to maintain distance, to protect herself from the inevitable pain of loving someone whose world was built on foundations she didn't understand. But then Marco's lips were on hers, and rational thought fled entirely. The kiss was nothing like the careful, controlled one they'd shared 5 years ago. This was desperate, hungry, 5 years of separation and longing poured into a single moment. Evelyn kissed him back with everything she'd been denying, her hands fisting in his shirt, her body pressed against his like she could merge them into one person. Marco's arms came around her, lifting her slightly, and she wrapped herself around him as the kiss deepened. It was too much, and not enough. Familiar and new, terrifying and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco pressed his forehead to hers again. "Tell me you didn't feel that," he said roughly. "Tell me I'm imagining this connection."
"I can't," Evelyn admitted, her voice breaking. "But, Marco, I'm still scared." "I know, so am I." His hands framed her face, his gray eyes intense. "But maybe we could be scared together this time." Before Evelyn could respond, a small voice came from the doorway. "Are you kissing?" They sprang apart to find Luna standing there, rubbing sleep from her eyes, Dr. Morrison hovering apologetically behind her. "I'm sorry," the nurse said quickly. "She woke up asking for both of you." "It's okay," Marco said, his composure returning with impressive speed. He crossed to Luna and knelt to her level. "Yes, I was kissing your mom. Is that okay with you?" Luna considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court judge. "Does that mean you love her?" "Yes," Marco said without hesitation. Evelyn's heart stopped. Luna looked at her expectantly, and Evelyn realized her daughter was waiting for confirmation, for the adults to make sense of this confusing situation.
"It's complicated, baby," Evelyn managed. "That's what grown-ups always say when they don't want to explain," Luna said with startling insight. Then she looked between them again. "Are we going to be a real family? Like the ones in my books?" Marco glanced at Evelyn, the question clear in his eyes. She could shut this down right now. Could tell Luna they were just friends co-parenting, that nothing would change, that the kiss meant nothing. But she was so tired of lying, tired of running, tired of denying what was becoming increasingly obvious. "We're trying to figure that out," Evelyn said carefully. "Would you like us to be a real family?" Luna's smile was brilliant. "Yes! Then Dad could read to me every night, and we could all eat breakfast together, and maybe get that dog you promised." Marco laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "You don't forget anything, do you?" "Nope." Luna yawned, her energy already flagging. "Can we have pancakes for dinner?" "Absolutely," Marco said. "Go rest a bit more, and I'll make them fresh." Dr. Morrison guided Luna back to her room, leaving Evelyn and Marco alone again. The moment stretched between them, heavy with everything they'd just admitted in front of their daughter. "I meant it," Marco said quietly. "What I told her. I love you, Evelyn. I've loved you since the night we met, and I never stopped. Not when you disappeared, not when I searched for you, not during any of the 5 years you were gone." Evelyn felt tears burning. "How can you say that? After what I did, because love isn't about someone being perfect. It's about choosing them anyway." Marco stepped closer. "You made choices that hurt me. I made choices that scared you. We both did damage. But Evelyn, what we have now, this chance to try again, to build something real, I don't want to waste it." "I don't know if I can do this," Evelyn whispered. "If I can be what you need." "I just need you to try. That's all. Just stay and try." Marco's voice was raw with honesty. "I'm not asking you to forget the past or pretend I'm someone I'm not. I'm asking you to see who I am now and decide if that's someone you could love." Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who'd given bone marrow without hesitation, who'd prepared a home for a daughter he'd just met, who'd respected her boundaries while making his intentions clear, who'd loved her through 5 years of absence and never given up hope. "I already do," she admitted, the words costing her everything. "I love you, Marco. I'm just terrified of what that means." Marco's expression transformed, hope and relief and something fierce flooding his features. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart hammering against hers. "We'll figure it out together," he promised into her hair. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Evelyn held on and let herself believe him. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of healing and tentative happiness. Luna's recovery accelerated beyond the doctor's expectations. Her blood count stabilized, her energy returned, and the shadow of death that had hung over her began to lift. She gained weight, her laugh came easier, and the color returned to her cheeks in ways that made Evelyn's heart soar every time she looked at her daughter. Marco was there for all of it. He adjusted his business schedule to be present for the milestones. Luna's first walk in the garden without getting tired, her first full day without needing a nap, the morning she woke up hungry for the first time in months. He documented everything with photos, created scrapbooks, made sure Luna knew she was celebrated. And slowly, carefully, he and Evelyn rebuilt what they'd started 5 years ago. They took it slow, shared dinners that became conversations that lasted hours, walks in the garden after Luna went to sleep, hands brushing accidentally on purpose, until Marco finally just took Evelyn's and held on. Stolen kisses in quiet corners, growing longer and deeper as Evelyn's walls continued to crumble. "Tell me about Sophia," Evelyn said one night as they sat on the patio, the stars brilliant overhead. It was a question she'd been afraid to ask, but she needed to understand all of Marco, including his grief. Marco was quiet for a long moment. Then, "She was a teacher, brilliant, passionate, believed she could save every student who walked into her classroom." His voice was distant but fond. "We met at a charity event I'd been dragged to. She called me out for being bored, and instead of being offended, I was fascinated." "What was she like?" "Strong-willed, stubborn. She knew what I was, what I did, and she loved me anyway. But she also drew lines, made me promise I'd leave that world eventually, build something legitimate for Mateo's future." Marco's jaw tightened. "I was working on it when they died, had started transitioning my businesses, cutting ties, but I wasn't fast enough." "It wasn't your fault," Evelyn said quietly. "Wasn't it? They died because of who I was, what I'd done, because I'd made enemies who wanted to hurt me." Marco looked at her, his expression raw. "That's why I understand why you ran, Evelyn, because I know what it's like to love someone and be terrified that your presence in their life will destroy them. But you're still here, still asking me to stay. Because I learned something after they died. Hiding from love doesn't protect you from pain. It just guarantees you'll face that pain alone." Marco's hand found hers. "I don't want either of us to be alone anymore." Evelyn squeezed his fingers. "Neither do I." They sat in comfortable silence, the night wrapping around them. Then Marco spoke again, his voice careful. "There's something we need to discuss. About Luna's biological father." As Evelyn stiffened. "What about him?" "Richard's family. Did he have any siblings, parents who might have rights?" "No. His parents died when he was young. No siblings, no extended family that I knew of." Evelyn frowned. "Why?" "Because legally I want to adopt Luna. Make everything official." Marco turned to face her fully. "But I need to make sure there are no competing claims, no one who could surface later and cause problems." The idea of Marco officially becoming Luna's father on paper, as well as biology, made Evelyn's chest tight with emotion. "There's no one. It's just us." "Then I'd like to start the process. If you're comfortable with that." "You'd really do that, even though she's biologically yours already?" "Because I want it legally recognized. I want Luna to have my name, my protection, every advantage I can give her." Marco's voice was fierce. "And I want there to be no question, ever, that she's my daughter." Evelyn felt tears spill over. Yes, let's do it." Marco pulled her close, and they held each other under the stars, two broken people who'd found their way back to each other through the most impossible of paths. But their hard-won peace was about to be shattered. The threat came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 6 weeks after Luna's transplant. Evelyn was making breakfast while Luna worked on a puzzle in the living room, finally well enough to move freely around the house. Marco was in his office on a business call. Everything was normal, peaceful, safe. Until the security alarm started blaring. Marco appeared instantly, his expression cold and focused. "Get Luna to the safe room, now." "What's happening?" "Someone just tried to breach the perimeter. Go, Evelyn. Take her and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." Evelyn's training kicked in, the drills Marco had insisted on when they first arrived, routes memorized, procedures practiced. She ran to the living room, scooped up a confused Luna, and headed for the hidden room behind Marco's office. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Luna asked, fear creeping into her voice. "Nothing, baby. We're just playing the safety game, remember? Like we practiced." The safe room was disguised as a bookshelf, accessible through a hidden panel. Evelyn got them inside and locked the heavy door just as she heard voices, harsh, angry, unknown. Through the small monitor inside the safe room, she could see Marco in the entry hall. He wasn't alone. 4 men faced him, armed and hostile, and Evelyn's blood ran cold. "You were told to leave it alone, Valenti," one of them said. "And you were told that my family is off limits," Marco replied, his voice deadly calm. "Your family, a woman who ran from you, and a bastard child." The man laughed cruelly. "You've gone soft, Marco. The old you would never have let personal attachments become vulnerabilities. The old me would have killed you for stepping foot on my property." Marco's voice dropped. "You have 10 seconds to leave before I demonstrate that I'm not as soft as you think." The men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this level of resistance. "We have orders. I don't care about your orders. You came to threaten my family. That was a mistake you won't live to repeat." What happened next was too fast for Evelyn to fully process. Marco moved with lethal precision, disarming the closest man and using his weapon to neutralize the others. Security flooded in from hidden positions, turning the hallway into a controlled battlefield. It was over in less than a minute. Marco stood among the fallen men, breathing hard, his expression carved from ice. He spoke into a radio, issuing orders in a clipped tone that made it clear this wasn't his first time dealing with threats. Then he looked directly at the camera he knew Evelyn was watching from. "It's over. You're safe. I'm coming to get you." When he opened the safe room door, Evelyn was shaking. Luna was crying silently, her face pressed against Evelyn's shoulder. Marco's expression shattered when he saw them. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "I'm so sorry. I believed they understood." "Who were they?" Evelyn demanded, clutching Luna tighter. "Remnants from my old organization. They didn't approve of my retirement, and they see you and Luna as leverage." Marco's hands clenched. "But they're gone now. All of them. I made sure of it." The implications of that statement made Evelyn's stomach turn. "What did you do?" "What I had to do to protect you." Marco's voice was steel. "And I'd do it again without hesitation." Evelyn looked at the man she loved, the man who'd just killed for her, for Luna, without a second thought, and felt her world tilting. This was what she'd run from 5 years ago. This violence, this darkness, this side of Marco that was capable of anything when it came to protection. But this time, she didn't run. This time, she stood up, still holding Luna, and walked to him. Marco's eyes widened as she pressed against him, her free arm wrapping around his waist. "Thank you," she whispered, "for keeping us safe." Marco's arms came around both of them, holding them like they were the only thing anchoring him to humanity. "Always," he promised, "I will always keep you safe, no matter what it costs." And standing there in the aftermath of violence, Evelyn finally understood what Marco had been trying to tell her all along. Love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone who would fight for you when it mattered most. The cleanup took 3 hours. Marco's security team swept the property with military efficiency, while Evelyn stayed with Luna in the bedroom, trying to soothe her daughter's fears with stories and gentle reassurances. Dr. Morrison checked Luna's vitals twice, worried the stress might trigger a setback, but their brave girl was stronger than any of them had expected. "Is Dad okay?" Luna kept asking, her small hands clutching the wolf Marco had given her. "He's fine, baby. He's making sure we're safe." "Those were bad men, weren't they? Like in the stories." Evelyn's throat tightened. Luna was too young to understand the full truth, but she was old enough to know when danger had touched their lives. "Yes, but they're gone now. Your dad made sure of it." "Dad's really strong," Luna said with the absolute faith of childhood. "He can protect us from anything." Evelyn wished she had that same unwavering certainty, because as much as Marco had proven himself today, the attack had shattered the illusion of safety she'd been building. This house, this life, this attempt at normalcy, it was all built on foundations that could crack when the wrong people decided to push. Marco finally appeared in the doorway as evening fell. He changed clothes, washed away any evidence of violence, but Evelyn could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of what he'd done settling on his shoulders. "Can I talk to you?" he asked Evelyn quietly. "Luna can stay with Dr. Morrison for a bit." Luna looked between them, then nodded with solemn understanding. "Okay, but come back soon, Dad." "I promise, little moon." Marco led Evelyn to his office and closed the door. The room felt different now, tainted by the violence that had unfolded just beyond its walls. He poured them both whiskey without asking, and Evelyn took the glass gratefully. "They're all dead," Marco said without preamble. "The 4 who came here and the 3 who sent them. I made sure there are no loose ends, no one left who sees you and Luna as targets." Evelyn took a long drink, the alcohol burning away some of the numbness. "How can you be sure?" "Because I know these people. I know how they think, how they operate." Marco's voice was flat, emotionless, in a way that was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. "The organization I used to work for is fractured now, competing factions fighting for control. The ones who came here today were making a play for power, trying to prove they could control me, but I sent a message that will reach everyone who matters." "What message?" "That Marco Valenti is no longer playing their games, that my family is untouchable, and that anyone who threatens what's mine will face consequences that make death look merciful." Marco finally looked at her, his gray eyes haunted. "I'm not proud of what I did today, Evelyn, but I'm not sorry either." "I know." Evelyn set down her glass. "And I'm not asking you to be sorry. You protected Luna. You protected me. That's all that matters." "Is it?" Marco's jaw tightened. "Because 5 years ago you ran from me for doing exactly this, for using violence to eliminate threats. What's different now?" Evelyn thought about that question, really thought about it. What had changed? Was it just desperation, the knowledge that she needed Marco's protection, or was it something deeper? "I'm different now," she said slowly. 5 years ago, I was still the woman Richard had molded me into. Someone who believed safety meant avoiding conflict, that love should be gentle and easy and free from darkness. I thought I could protect Luna by running from anything complicated or dangerous. And now? Now I understand that the world is complicated and dangerous, whether I acknowledge it or not. Richard was proof of that. He hurt me with emotional manipulation and control, and that was just as violent as anything you've ever done. At least with you, the violence is directed outward, at people who mean us harm." Evelyn moved closer to him. "I'm not saying I like it, Marco. I'm not saying I'll ever be comfortable with this side of your life, but I understand it now, and I trust that you'll do whatever it takes to keep Luna safe." Marco pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel him trembling. "I would burn the world down for you," he whispered into her hair. "For both of you. And that should probably terrify you." "Maybe it does." "A little," Evelyn admitted. "But it also makes me feel safer than I've felt in 6 years." They stood like that for a long time, drawing strength from each other. Then Marco pulled back just enough to look at her face. "We need to leave," he said. "This house is compromised now. Even though the immediate threat is gone, people know you're here. I have another property, more remote, more secure. We'll move there until I can be absolutely certain no one else is coming." "For how long?" "However long it takes." Marco's expression was grim. "Weeks, maybe months. But Evelyn, I need you to understand, this is the last time. After this, after I make it clear that you're permanently off limits, there won't be any more threats. I'm severing the final connections to my old life, burning every bridge, making sure no one has any reason to look in your direction ever again." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means I'm walking away from businesses that still have ties to that world, even legitimate ones. It means relocating my entire operation, changing how I work, who I work with." Marco's voice was steady. "It means choosing you and Luna over everything else I've built." The magnitude of that sacrifice made Evelyn's chest tight. "Marco, I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm choosing." His hands framed her face. "I've spent 5 years building an empire, Evelyn. But what good is any of it if I can't keep my family safe? If I have to constantly look over my shoulder wondering when the next threat will come?" "So you'll just give it all up?" "Not all of it. The legitimate businesses, the investments, those stay. But anything with even a shadow of connection to my past? Gone. Marco's thumb brushed her cheekbone. I'm choosing the life I should have chosen years ago. The one Sophia asked me to build. The one I can share with you and Luna without fear. Evelyn felt tears spilling over. I love you, she whispered. I love you so much it terrifies me. Good. Marco's smile was tired but genuine. Because I'm terrified too. But maybe that's what love is supposed to be. Terrifying and wonderful and worth every risk. He kissed her then, soft and deep, and Evelyn poured everything she couldn't say into that kiss. All her fear and hope and desperate need to believe they could make this work. When they finally pulled apart, Marco rested his forehead against hers. We leave tomorrow morning. Pack only what you and Luna absolutely need. Everything else can be replaced. Where are we going? Somewhere no one will think to look. Marco's expression was determined. Somewhere we can finally breathe. The new house was actually an old farmhouse, nestled in rolling hills 3 hours from the city. It was smaller than the first property, more rustic, with weathered wood and stone that had stood for generations. But it had something the other house lacked: complete isolation. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, the property was surrounded by private land, and the only road in was long enough that they'd have warning if anyone approached. Luna loved it immediately. Despite the trauma of the attack, or perhaps because of it, she seemed to blossom in the wide open spaces. She explored the barn, chased butterflies through wildflower meadows, and declared the farmhouse perfect for adventures. Can we really get a dog now? She asked hopefully on their third day there. Marco and Evelyn exchanged glances. They'd been careful with Luna since the attack, watching for signs of trauma or fear, but their daughter seemed remarkably resilient, processing what had happened with the flexibility of childhood. If your doctors say it's safe, Marco said, the same promise he'd made before. You're still recovering, remember? We have to be careful about germs and infections. But I feel better. I feel normal. Luna spun in a circle as if to demonstrate. Please, I promise I'll be careful. Dr. Morrison, who'd made the move with them, smiled from the doorway. Actually, her latest blood work shows remarkable improvement. The transplant is taking beautifully, and her immune system is getting stronger every day. A dog might actually be therapeutic. Companionship, responsibility, routine. Luna's face lit up. See? Dr. Sarah says it's okay. Marco looked at Evelyn, his expression softening. What do you think? Evelyn thought about how much Luna had been through. The illness, the hospital, the transplant, the attack. How much this brave little girl had endured without complaint. And she thought about the life they were trying to build here. One with space for joy and normalcy and the simple happiness of a child and her dog. I think we should go to the shelter this weekend, Evelyn said. Luna's squeal of delight was worth everything. That Saturday, they drove to a rescue shelter 2 towns over. Luna was practically vibrating with excitement, chattering about what kind of dog she wanted, what she would name it, all the things they would do together. The shelter was small and overcrowded, filled with dogs of every size and temperament. Luna moved from cage to cage with serious consideration, as if this were the most important decision of her life. Then she stopped in front of a cage holding a medium-sized dog with golden fur and soulful brown eyes. The dog was older, maybe 5 or 6, with a gentle demeanor and a tail that wagged hopefully when Luna approached. This one, Luna said with absolute certainty. This is my dog. The shelter worker opened the cage, and the dog approached Luna carefully, sniffing her hand before pressing against her legs. Luna wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, and the animal stood perfectly still, as if understanding this small human needed gentleness. Her name is Sunny, the worker said. She was surrendered when her previous owner went into a nursing home. She's great with kids, fully trained and so sweet-tempered, but she's been here for 6 months because most people want puppies. She's perfect, Luna declared. Can we take her home? Marco knelt beside Luna and the dog, his hand joining Luna's in stroking Sunny's soft fur. What do you think? He asked Evelyn. Evelyn looked at the 3 of them, Marco, Luna, and the gentle dog who'd already stolen her daughter's heart, and felt something settle into place. This was family. messy and complicated and built from broken pieces, but family nonetheless. I think Sunny just found her forever home, Evelyn said. The adoption process was quick, expedited by Marco's generous donation to the shelter. By afternoon, they were driving home with Sunny sitting contentedly in the back seat beside Luna, who couldn't stop smiling. "Thank you," Luna said softly, looking between her parents. "This is the best day ever." Marco reached back to squeeze her hand. "You deserve it, little moon. You deserve every good thing." That night, after Luna fell asleep with Sunny curled up at the foot of her bed, Marco and Evelyn sat on the farmhouse porch watching the stars. "I've been thinking," Marco said quietly, "about what comes next." "What do you mean?" "We've been in survival mode for weeks. The transplant, the attack, the move. But Luna's getting better. We're safe here, and we need to start thinking about the future." Marco turned to face her. "What do you want, Evelyn? Not for Luna, not for me. What do you want for yourself?" The question caught her off guard. For so long, her wants had been secondary to survival, to protecting Luna, to just making it through each day. She'd almost forgotten she was allowed to want things for herself. "I want to teach again," she said slowly. "I loved literature, loved helping students discover stories. I gave that up when I married Richard, and then survival made it impossible in Boston. But maybe now, there's a small private school about 20 minutes from here," Marco said. "They might need a literature teacher. I could make some calls." "I don't want you buying me a job, Marco." "I wouldn't, but I could arrange an interview, let you prove yourself on your own merits." His hand found hers. "You have a master's degree in literature, years of teaching experience. Any school would be lucky to have you." Evelyn squeezed his fingers. "Okay, yes, I'd like that. What else?" "I want a life that's ours," Evelyn said. "Not hiding, not running, not constantly looking over our shoulders. I want Luna to grow up with friends and birthday parties and all the normal childhood experiences I've kept from her." "She will," Marco promised. "The threats are gone, Evelyn. I made sure of it. You can have that life now." "And us?" Evelyn's voice dropped. "What do you want for us?" Marco was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "I want to marry you," he said finally. "I want Luna to have both our names officially. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine and I'm yours, that we're building something permanent together." Evelyn's breath caught. "That's a lot? Too much?" "No." She turned to face him fully. "Not too much. Just terrifying." "Everything worth having is terrifying." Marco pulled her closer. "But I'm not asking you to decide tonight. Take your time. Think about what you want. I'm not going anywhere." But Evelyn didn't need time. She'd spent 5 years running from this exact moment, and she was done running. "Ask me," she whispered. Marco's eyes widened. "Evelyn, ask me properly. Right now." Marco stood, pulling her to her feet, and then, to her complete surprise, he dropped to one knee. He didn't have a ring, hadn't prepared a speech, but the look in his eyes was everything she needed. "Evelyn Cross, soon to be Price, hopefully to be Valenti," he said, a small smile playing at his lips despite the solemnity of the moment. "You are the most stubborn, brave, infuriating woman I've ever known. You ran from me, kept my daughter from me, and made me question everything I thought I knew about love and family." "This is a terrible proposal so far," Evelyn said, but she was laughing through tears. "I'm not done." Marco's voice gentled. "You also showed me what real strength looks like. You survived things that would have broken most people. You raised an incredible daughter against impossible odds, and you came back even when you were terrified, because love matters more than fear. Marco, I'm never going to be an easy man to love. My past will always exist even if I've left it behind. But I promise you, Evelyn, I will spend every day of the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice by staying." He took both her hands. "Will you marry me? Will you let me be Luna's father officially, legally, permanently? Will you build this life with me, terrifying and wonderful and worth every risk?" Evelyn pulled him to his feet and kissed him, pouring every answer into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, she was crying freely. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it. Marco's smile was brilliant, transforming his usually controlled features into something young and hopeful. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like teenagers. From inside the house, they heard Luna's voice. "Are you guys being loud? Sonny and I are trying to sleep." They looked at each other and started laughing again. This was their life now. Imperfect and complicated and built from pieces of broken pasts. But it was theirs, and that made it perfect. The wedding happened 6 weeks later in the farmhouse garden. It was small and intimate, just Luna, Dr. Morrison, Marco's lawyer who'd become a friend, and a handful of people Marco trusted completely. Evelyn wore a simple white dress Luna had helped her choose, and Marco wore a suit that made him look both powerful and somehow vulnerable. Luna was the flower girl, dressed in silver to match her name, scattering petals with serious concentration. Sonny followed her down the aisle, wearing a bow tie that Luna had insisted on. The ceremony was brief, the words traditional but heartfelt. When Marco slipped a ring on Evelyn's finger, a simple band with a single diamond that caught the light, she felt the last of her walls crumble completely. "I love you," she whispered as the officiant pronounced them married. "I love you more," Marco whispered back. Luna cheered when they kissed, and Sonny barked, and the small gathering applauded. It wasn't the fairy tale wedding Evelyn had once dreamed of, back when she'd married Richard in a ceremony that was all show and no substance. This was better. This was real. Afterward, they had dinner in the farmhouse, a meal Marco had prepared himself, teaching Luna how to make pasta the way his mother had taught him. They ate and laughed and told stories, and when Luna fell asleep at the table, her head on Sonny's back, Marco carried her to bed while Evelyn cleaned up. "Leave it," Marco said when he returned, pulling her away from the dishes. "Dance with me instead." "There's no music." Marco pulled out his phone and soft jazz filled the kitchen. He drew Evelyn into his arms, and they swayed together in the space between the table and the stove, exactly where they'd shared so many meals and conversations over the past weeks. "Are you happy?" Marco asked quietly. Evelyn looked up at him, this man who'd killed for her, loved her, given her a second chance at everything. "I'm terrified and hopeful and more in love than I've ever been. So yes, I'm happy." "Good." Marco pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Because I plan to spend the rest of our lives making sure you stay that way." They danced until the song ended, then kept dancing to the silence, neither willing to let go. The months that followed were perhaps the most normal Evelyn had experienced in years. She got the teaching job at the private school, impressing the board with her passion and knowledge. She taught literature to teenagers who reminded her why she'd fallen in love with books in the first place. She came home every day to Marco and Luna and Sonny, to dinner conversations and homework help, and the beautiful mundanity of family life. Luna thrived. Her hair grew back, dark and thick like Marco's. Her blood work remained perfect, the transplant a complete success. She started at a small elementary school where she made friends easily, her resilience and warmth drawing other children to her naturally. She called Marco Dad, without hesitation now, and had started asking questions about why Evelyn and Marco hadn't been together when she was born. They'd answered carefully, age-appropriately, explaining that sometimes people who love each other need time apart to grow before they can be together properly. Luna had accepted this with the flexibility of childhood, more interested in her current family than the complicated past. Marco kept his promise about severing ties to his old life. He sold businesses, restructured others, built something entirely new and clean. He worked from home most days, making it a point to have breakfast with Luna every morning and dinner with both of them every evening. Evelyn watched him transform from the controlled, dangerous man she'd known into something softer. He was still capable of steel when necessary. She'd seen it flash in his eyes when men looked too long at Luna, or when strangers appeared on their property. But with them, with his family, he was gentle and patient and somehow more human. One evening, nearly a year after the transplant, Evelyn found Marco in Luna's room after their daughter had fallen asleep. He was sitting beside her bed, just watching her breathe, his expression unguarded. "You okay?" Evelyn asked softly from the doorway. Marco looked up, and she saw tears on his face. "I was just thinking about how close we came to losing her, how, if you hadn't called me, if I hadn't been a match, if anything had gone differently." Evelyn crossed to him and wrapped her arms around him from behind. But none of those things happened. She's here. She's healthy. She's ours. I know. Marco's hand came up to cover hers. But I keep thinking about the 5 years I missed. Her first steps, first words, birthdays, all the moments I can never get back. So we make new moments, Evelyn said gently. Better ones. Together. Marco pulled her around to sit on his lap, holding her close. Do you ever regret it? Running, I mean. Do you wish you'd made different choices? Evelyn thought about that question honestly. I regret that Luna didn't have you from the beginning. I regret the fear and isolation and years of struggling alone. But I don't regret protecting her the best way I knew how, even if it was the wrong way. It wasn't wrong, Marco said. It was human. You did what you thought was right with the information you had. So did you, when you killed Richard. They'd never talked about it directly, that elephant that had haunted them through everything. Marco stiffened slightly. I'd do it again, he said quietly. He was threatening you, threatening the baby. I eliminated the threat. I know. And I understand why now. Evelyn cupped his face. But Marco, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if we ever face another threat, another danger, you'll talk to me first. Let me be part of the decision instead of just protecting me from it. Evelyn's voice was firm. I'm not fragile. I'm not someone who needs to be sheltered from hard truths. I'm your partner. Treat me like one. Marco studied her face, then nodded slowly. You're right. I'm sorry. Old habits, trying to shield you, control the situation alone. But you deserve better than that. We both do. Evelyn kissed him softly. We're in this together now. All of it, the good and the hard. Together, Marco agreed. They sat like that for a while longer, holding each other in their daughter's room, surrounded by the evidence of the life they were building. Stuffed animals and books, drawings taped to walls, a dog sleeping in the corner. Normal. Beautiful. Theirs. A year and a half after the transplant, Luna had her final checkup with the oncologist. The entire family made the trip to the hospital. Evelyn, Marco, and even Sonny, who'd been certified as a therapy dog and was allowed to accompany them. Luna was nervous despite her brave face, and Evelyn understood why. These checkups had been regular reminders of how fragile life could be. But this time was different. Dr. Chen met them with a smile that told Evelyn everything before the doctor even spoke. Luna's blood work is perfect, absolutely perfect. The bone marrow transplant was completely successful, and she's showing no signs of cancer. As of today, she's officially in full remission. Luna looked confused. What does that mean? It means you're cured, sweetheart, Dr. Chen said gently. The cancer is gone. You're going to be just fine. Luna's face lit up with understanding, and she turned to Marco. Your superpower worked. No, little moon. Marco knelt to her level, his voice thick with emotion. Your superpower worked. Your strength, your bravery, your determination to keep fighting. That's what saved you. But you helped, Luna insisted, wrapping her arms around his neck. You and Mommy both helped. Marco pulled her close, and Evelyn saw his shoulders shake with silent tears. She joined them, wrapping her arms around both, and they held each other in that sterile hospital room, while Dr. Chen discreetly stepped out to give them privacy. We did it, Evelyn whispered. She's okay. She's really okay. She's perfect, Marco said roughly. Just like her mother. Luna pulled back to look at both of them, her gray eyes, Marco's eyes, sparkling with happiness. Can we go home now? I want to tell Sonny the good news. They laughed through tears and agreed. On the drive home, Luna chattered excitedly about what she wanted to do now that she was completely better. Join soccer, learn piano, maybe get a kitten to keep Sonny company. Marco and Evelyn exchanged amused glances over her head, letting her dream out loud. But that night, after Luna was asleep, Marco found Evelyn in their bedroom and pulled her into his arms. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For calling me when she needed help, for giving me a chance to know her, for building this life with me. Marco's hand moved to rest on her stomach. For giving me hope that I could have this again. Evelyn covered his hand with hers, smiling at the secret they'd been keeping for the past week. You're going to be a father again, she confirmed. Are you ready? I've been ready since the moment I met you, Marco said. This time, I get to do it right. From the beginning. We'll do it right, Evelyn corrected. Together. Marco kissed her deeply, and Evelyn tasted salt. His tears or hers, she wasn't sure. It didn't matter. They were building something new from the ruins of their pasts, and every piece mattered. 2 years later, Evelyn stood in the farmhouse kitchen watching her family through the window. Luna, now 7 and healthy and vibrant, was teaching her baby brother how to pet Sonny gently. Marco was nearby, supervising with the careful attention he brought to everything involving their children. The new addition, a son they'd named Matteo, after the child Marco had lost, was 18 months old, fearless and curious in the way only toddlers could be. Gentle Maddie, Luna was saying, guiding his small hand. Sonny's old, she needs gentle touches. Maddie giggled and buried his face in Sonny's fur, and the patient dog tolerated it with the same grace she'd shown Luna from the beginning. Marco caught Evelyn watching and smiled, that warm, open expression that still made her heart flutter. He said something to Luna, who nodded and took over watching Maddie. Then Marco walked toward the house. What are you thinking about? He asked when he found her. Everything. Evelyn leaned into him as his arms came around her. How 5 years ago I was alone and terrified, convinced I'd never be safe again. And now look at us. Look at us, Marco agreed, his voice full of wonder. 2 kids, a dog, a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. Not exactly what I imagined for myself. Is it enough? Evelyn asked, the old fear creeping in. Do you ever miss the power, the empire, the life you gave up? Marco turned her to face him, his expression serious. Evelyn, I had power. I had wealth and influence and people who feared my name, and I would have traded all of it in a second for one more day with Sophia and Matteo. Now I have a second chance, you, Luna, our son, this life we've built. I will never take that for granted. Even when I'm difficult and stubborn? Especially then. Marco kissed her forehead. Because you being difficult and stubborn is what saved Luna's life. It's what brought you back to me. It's what makes you the incredible mother and wife and partner you are. Evelyn felt tears prickling. I love you so much. I love you more. Marco pulled her closer. And I'm going to spend every day proving it. Through the window, they watched Luna help Maddie stand, both children laughing as Sonny barked encouragement. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold, and for a moment everything was perfect. Do you think Luna will remember? Evelyn asked quietly. When she's older, will she remember being sick, the hospital, how scared we all were? Maybe, Marco said. But she'll also remember that we fought for her, that we never gave up, that love was stronger than fear. He pressed a kiss to Evelyn's temple. And that's what matters. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, watching their children play. The past would always exist, Richard's death, the 5 years apart, the illness that had brought them back together. But the past didn't define them anymore. This did. This moment, this family, this life they'd consciously chosen despite every reason to run. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Marco found Evelyn on the porch where they'd shared so many important conversations. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Evelyn opened it to find a silver pendant, a crescent moon with 2 small stars beside it. Luna and Matteo, Marco explained, our children, our light in the darkness. Evelyn let him fasten it around her neck, the metal warm against her skin. It's perfect. You're perfect. Marco settled beside her, pulling her close. 5 years ago, you walked into my life and reminded me what it felt like to hope. Then you disappeared, and I thought I'd lost that forever. But you came back, Evelyn. You came back and gave me everything. You gave me everything too, Evelyn said softly. Safety when I needed it most. Love when I'd given up on finding it. A family I didn't think I deserved. You deserve the world. Marco's voice was fierce. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it.
They sat together under the stars, two broken people who'd found their way to wholeness through the most unlikely path. The farmhouse behind them held their sleeping children and their patient dog, and all the evidence of a life built on second chances. It wasn't the life Evelyn had planned. It wasn't even the life she dreamed of during those desperate years in Boston. It was better. Because it was real, hard-won and honest, and built on a foundation of choices made with open eyes and open hearts. "No more running," Evelyn whispered, more to herself than to Marco. "No more running," Marco agreed. "We're home now. All of us." And finally, after years of fear and flight and fighting for survival, Evelyn let herself believe him. They were home. They were safe. They were loved.
And that was everything. Years later, when Luna asked about how her parents fell in love, they would tell her an edited version, about a night at a gallery, about a man who kept his promises, about a mother who did everything to protect her daughter. They would tell her about courage and sacrifice, and the way love could survive even when circumstances tried to tear it apart. But the full truth, about Richard's death, about the 5 years of hiding, about the violence that had touched their lives, that would wait until Luna was older, until she could understand that sometimes love meant making impossible choices, that sometimes protection looked like violence, that sometimes the right path was the one that led through darkness before reaching light. For now, though, Luna knew the important parts. She had a father who would move mountains for her, a mother who would fight anyone who threatened her, a baby brother who adored her, a dog who'd been there through the worst and stayed through the best. She had a family, complicated and unconventional and built from broken pieces, but whole nonetheless. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The past was buried. The future was theirs to build. And every day they chose each other. Every day they chose love over fear. Every day they chose to stay. And that made all the difference.